Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to the rest of you. We are back. It is Friday, and yes, we are going live. We have another episode of Bitcoin Magazine Live coming to you from my mother's basement. It is I, your host, Q. I'm joined by my co host, Alex McShane, and today's guest is none other than Sam Callahan from Swan. Let's kick things off right away. Sam, how are you doing today, man?
Doing good, man. TikTok next block, just trucking along in this quote unquote bear market. But I'm really digging the building that's going on and just doing well.
Love that. Let's start. We were talking a little bit before we kick things off. Bitcoin origin story. How did you first learn about Bitcoin? And genuinely curious, what was your initial reaction? Were you like, "Oh, this makes sense," or like, "Yeah, what is this crazy scam?"
Yeah. So, so when I went into college, I was a business major, and this was like 2008. Not to age myself, but so it was right in the midst of the global financial crisis, and I was really kind of turned off by the fraud that I was seeing in there. And then the teachers were kind of pushing Keynesianism dogma on me, and I was like, "Screw this!" So I changed majors to physics and biology, and then I went into healthcare. So I got a doctorate in physical therapy, worked with professional sports teams for like 4 years. But I was always obsessed with the corruption in the banking system. So I studied the global financial system, studied central banking and financial history. And then I got kind of turned off by it because I didn't see a solution. It just seemed so big, so intertwined with the regulatory system and politicians. And I just didn't see a way for them to take power or take power away from them. And so kind of turned off from that for a little bit, focused on my job. And then I saw this movie called Dope, which I don't know if anybody's heard of it. It's this movie about a kid who grew up poor in Compton, and he's trying to go to Harvard, and he comes across this bag of drugs, and he sells the drugs to try to raise money to go to Harvard. And in that movie, this was 2015, he uses Bitcoin to raise the money. And so kind of like the Silk Road era. So that was kind of like bad publicity for Bitcoin. But in that movie, I was like, that's interesting. I thought Bitcoin was kind of, gone. It kind of was in the middle of that bear market. And so that kind of was my first touch point of Bitcoin. And I kind of shrugged it off. And then in the beginning of 2017, kind of popped up again with the price action. And that's when I took a deep dive. And then I discovered that this is the Achilles heel to central banking that I've been trying to find for a really long time. And at that point, I just went all in. So that's kind of my story.
I want to, and I'm genuinely curious about sort of what it was that stood out to you that made this the Achilles heel. Was it the scarcity aspect of it? Was the fact that there's no centralized control over it? What was sort of the attributes that you gave credence to Bitcoin to say, hey, this could actually disrupt the thing that I despise the most?
It was the censorship resistance. It was the fact that nobody could control it. That was the number one thing. The fact that they couldn't have power over the network, and that it could maintain its scarcity, and they couldn't print any more of it. That was the big thing for me. And I just felt like they were lying to the public. Even before the bailouts, subprime is contained, and then after the bailouts, we'll reduce our balance sheet. Ben Bernanke, and now fast forward to now, and balance sheet's over $8 trillion. And I just feel like it's dishonest money that leads to dishonest statistics, dishonest accounting, dishonest relationships. And Bitcoin was like this objective truth that you could trust. And so I felt like it could really solve a lot of problems in our society because we can organize around this thing that we can trust will remain the same and won't be manipulated by central banks. And so it kind of just clicked for me at that point.
I also love the fact that, like, despite it not being directly Silk Road, there was some sort of a like Bitcoin and drug use sort of tangent to set you on this path. Like, look, I'm not supposed to necessarily be broadcasting this anymore, but I'm a huge stoner. I love the idea of Bitcoin helping the weed industry at large. And I'm genuinely curious your thoughts, like, to infiltrate an industry like that and sort of fix the issues where you don't have a banking system. to help out the weed industry. But at the same time, you still hear the narrative being pushed that, hey, Bitcoin's used for illegal activities, Bitcoin's used by drug dealers, Bitcoin's used for this or that. I'm curious your thoughts, just like off the cuff. What do you think that could lead? Does Bitcoin being involved in the weed industry possibly help or hurt each of these industries in their own right?
Yeah, well, I live in Colorado, so all of these like weed companies still have to abide by these silly rules. Like they can't just accept credit cards or anything. They have to do all these stupid regulations that they have to go through that impedes their business practices. And I've talked to a lot of them, and they love the idea of adopting Bitcoin. Using BTC Pay Server, and some of them are adopting it. It's kind of happening slowly, but even on the broad, like federal level, where you have these states kind of one by one um, legalizing marijuana. And I think we're going to see something similar with Bitcoin, where at the federal level they're kind of dragging their feet with marijuana, even though all these states are embracing it. It's bringing in all these tax revenues. There's a lot of medicinal benefits of the drug, and as opposed to like pharmaceuticals and things like that. And so I think we're going to see the same thing with Bitcoin. I think the federal level is probably going to drag its feet, but you're going to see these states become leaders. And we're already kind of seeing that like this year really start to gain traction. So I see a lot of similarities between the ascension of the marijuana industry and the Bitcoin industry.
I'm curious also, just like, would you think that like a normie, for example, who's not involved in Bitcoin, not aware of it, all of a sudden sees, oh, now you can go to your local dispensary and buy weed with Bitcoin. Do you think that would set Bitcoin in general back, or would that help propel it forward as more use cases begin to pop up?
Well, it's kind of tricky because right now that narrative is used against Bitcoin still, even though it's not really true, right? So like Chain Analysis did their crypto crime report and found that 0.15% of total crypto volume is used for illicit activities. And we're still trying to shake off that reputation that it's used for drugs and criminals. Like that's still, normies still believe that because mainstream media has been pushing that for 10 years now. So you don't necessarily want to like associate only with that. But then again, everyone has their different beliefs in terms of drug usage and marijuana, but really Bitcoin's for everyone. And I think everyone's going to see the benefits of having Bitcoin that's censorship resistant, and it's just superior payment technology as well. So I think a lot of these marijuana companies will start to adopt it because they just see it as a better solution to what they have to do now, which is basically have people pay with debit cards and they get screwed with fees, like a $3 fee every single time, or they have to pay with cash, which I mean, not many people carry around a bunch of cash anymore. So it's kind of impediment on their industry. So I do see them kind of embracing Bitcoin, but it's still early days, and we're still seeing that kind of progress.
Thank you for entertaining the conversation about weed, but that is not why I dragged you on to Bitcoin Magazine Live today. I did drag you on this show though because you had an excellent thread where you in each and every single tweet, you took the time to essentially debunk a lot of what the IMF has been saying about Bitcoin. We're seeing a lot of conversations get spun up of different angles that they want to take with this technology. I'm curious, first off, what set you on this path? Was it Corey being like, yo, go do this research, or was it genuinely like your frustrations?
It wasn't Corey. So, I mean, these are my own opinions. These aren't the opinions of Swan, but Swan's cool enough to let me kind of dig into these organizations and express my thoughts. I just think it's really important to criticize these international financial institutions that really have no authority to tell sovereign nations what to do, but they find themselves in the crosshair of politicians advising them on what to do. And it just so happens that these politicians usually adopt the policies that the IMF and the Bank of International Settlements and the FATF, their guidelines become our laws. And I have a big qualm with that. Like, I do not agree with what they're saying. And I don't want the future that they're kind of forming in their papers and their publications. And I just think there's more awareness that needs to be brought up about these organizations, because Bitcoiners focus a lot on Bitcoin because it's exciting, it's optimistic, it's fun. It's fun to think about the future with Bitcoin, but it's really important to understand the problems that it solves as well. And I think the IMF, just to be clear about my bias, I completely despise the IMF. I think they are, suck the life out of every country that they work with, like a tumor. And they have this mission statement of being like spreading prosperity, but if you actually dig into their track record, it is nothing but despair. And countries in Africa call them the Institute of Misery and Famine. And for me, it's an international human rights issue, and that's why I dig into them and try to tell people what they're planning. Because if you know anything about the IMF, you don't want these people planning the architecture of the future global financial system. And so that's kind of why I dig into them and share that research.
Yeah, I mean, look, you did not pull back any punches, but you also, you debunked a lot of FUD in this. And I want to let you maybe kick us off of what is the first sort of the the one thing that if someone says it, regardless of it being an IMF member, someone that you're hanging out with on a Friday night, or just someone that you overhear saying it in line at the grocery store, where you're like, no, you're so wrong, and this is why. Like, what is that piece of FUD?
Well, there's two. There's the energy usage, and then there's the criminal activity. That's like their go-tos, and that's if you see this coordinated attack from basically all these institutions. You saw it from the European Central Bank the other day. You see it from the IMF. You see it from the Bank of International Settlements. They all say the same two major FUDs, and that's the energy and the criminal usage. And the energy usage is it's ridiculous because they cite the exact same studies, right? They cite a Dutch central banker named Alex de Vries, who uses flawed methodologies to estimate Bitcoin's, footprint, and it's just completely flawed. Like for example, Ben from Bitfarms, the chief mining officer, shared a great piece on Bitcoin Magazine that I share in the thread, where when China banned half the hash rate and it went offline, Alex DeVry's estimation of Bitcoin's carbon footprint just continued to go up like it never happened. And so it's not even based in reality. It is completely flawed. And I think these institutions should be embarrassed for citing it. And you have to, think if it's either malicious or it's just pure incompetence that they don't even look into the research that they cite in their articles. And then the other one is the criminal activity, which that's so easy to debunk because Bitcoin's so transparent. And there's actually, whether you agree with it or not, there's chain analysis companies like Chainalysis, and they put out a crypto crime report every year, and 0.15% of total crypto volume is used for illicit activity, and they use that and they to justify increased regulatory overreach. So increased surveillance, increased standards on virtual asset service providers like exchanges. They make them do things even more stricter than the traditional financial institutions because they say that it's used more for criminal activity. They catastrophize and say that it's used to finance nuclear weapons in these papers when there's no direct evidence of that I found. So those are the two big pieces of FUD that are used to chastise proof of work and Bitcoin. So
Well, let's start with the energy stuff. I mean, I was pulling up pictures of Pablo Escobar and his piles of US dollars while you were bringing up the illegal activities. That's my always favorite counterpoint of like Pablo Escobar and El Chapo aren't accepting Bitcoin for all of their wheelings and dealings. They're accepting USD. Um, but before we go down that rabbit hole, let's talk a lot about this energy stuff because we hear it from all angles. We hear it especially so in the mining space. And you bring up an excellent point. Like this article that a lot of these IMF people are citing is literally just a 2-page research paper that was written by a bunch of college undergrad students. Like there's
right.
no substance, there's no facts behind that. Shout out to Nathaniel Harmon who brought that up. He was on the show on Monday. If you guys didn't get a chance to check that episode out, make sure you do. But I'm curious your thoughts of what influence do you pick up on the IMF having on the global stage? We see them try to influence El Salvador. El Salvador is creating a brand new way to mine Bitcoin
utilizing energy from a volcano. You also, in turn, are seeing a lot of development out of the state of Texas, for example. We've seen oil, natural gas flaring turn into an energy source for Bitcoin mining. But then you also have the other side of the coin in New York. And now you're seeing legislation push that could essentially inhibit Bitcoin development there. What, if any, influence do you think the IMF is having across all of these examples and more?
Well, unfortunately, I think the IMF does have influence. I mean, they work behind closed doors with the Bank of International Settlements, as well as these other international financial institutions, to, you know, build the financial system and plan the future of the financial system. And there's no oversight or anything. But what, like I said, if you go through their working papers from years past, a lot of what they do becomes reality. And so, you know, with the energy stuff, it's just such a hot topic politically, and there's a lot of nuance to it. And unfortunately, nuance is completely lost in our world today, and around very politically hot topics like that. Um, I would say the best argument for Bitcoin is that it's worth every watt, and that it uses a very small rounding error essentially of the total global energy consumption. CoinShares put out a recent piece that estimated at 0.05% of total energy consumption, and it's worth every watt because we're in a world today where 1.2 billion people live in double-digit inflation, where inflation's at multi-decade highs right now, where financial censorship, seizures, capital controls is becoming more and more the norm against the global, citizens of the world. And we need this, we need this technology right now, and it's worth every single watt. And I think that this is more about control, that they can't control proof of work, and which is why they slander its energy use. Because when people hear, oh, it uses more energy than Denmark, or oh, it's going to boil the oceans and increase the, carbon emission, or the heat the planet by 2 degrees, or whatever the hell it says, they get all scared. It sounds like really scary, and they're like, what's the point of this? But I think it just comes down to it's worth it, and it's pretty minuscule energy usage in the total global energy consumption.
I want to first start with sort of this chain that you alluded to at the very beginning of that response, where like it's not just the IMF, they're working with all these different entities. I mean, break it down if you can, just on a macro level for those of us who maybe aren't as adept at understanding just how this operates. How many different sort of international organizations is the IMF touching and influencing that like you and I may not necessarily be aware of, but that we feel the effects of these other entities? You bring up energy. I'm assuming there's something to do with transportation and food storage as well. How much of our day-to-day life is impacted by people that we never had a say in putting into their positions of power?
Well, a lot. I mean, this is like the globalist high finance central bankers that kind of work above sovereign nations. And so there's a few organizations. There's the Bank of International Settlements, who kind of looks at the international monetary flows, but also has an innovation hub and is really deep into CBDC research. And they work with the IMF and the World Bank, where the World Bank, gives out more long-term loans and for development projects in these third world countries. At least that's their purpose on paper. And then you have the IMF, who does more short-term loans and who's like a financial firefighter, and they all work together. And then you have like the World Economic Forum, who's like pushing policy and all these messages, like that recent video that they put out that slandered proof of work again. So there's this coordinated attack where this group of global central bankers do not like Bitcoin, and you're hearing the exact same messages coming out of all these organizations. So they do influence governments at the policy level. They're in the ears of politicians. And the IMF itself is an extension of the U.S. Treasury, because the U.S. has the most voting power. They actually have the only veto power. So if an IMF decides to do something like loan to a country, it's a huge consortium of countries that involved with the IMF, but only the US has veto power. So if they don't like it, they say, we don't Like, we're not going to do that. And so the IMF is kind of an extension of the US Treasury. And so it's very intertwined with what happens for us at the policy level.
And forgive the ignorance of this question, but genuinely, like, at what point does my vote or the people that I have a say in putting into office here domestically, which of those people have a say in who is in charge of the IMF at that point? Because I'm assuming there are a few steps removed to where, like, I have no say in Jerome Powell being the Fed chief, for example, but I sure as hell know that I have almost negative say in any of the people in the IMF. Like, where does that decision making go as far as who sits on the IMF and is making those decisions?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, the short answer is you don't. So that's kind of one of my big qualms. Like, we don't have any, it's all unelected individuals, right? But the US Treasury usually has a representative at the IMF. That's like a US representative. And then the IMF has 190 member countries, but there's only 24 people that are voted onto the executive board who actually makes decisions. There's, people from different countries, but it gets super, super political within the IMF. The IMF organization is super complex, which I think is part of their strategy, because it's really hard to really see how the politics work within the organization and who's actually making the decisions here. And so, from an outside looking in, I have to say that it's hard even for me, who's looked into this stuff, to understand like who is actually pulling the strings in the IMF, because you have this 24 executive board members, but like I said, there's veto power that the U.S. has. And it usually the policies are asymmetric towards benefiting the large Western countries who have more power within the IMF compared to the smaller emerging markets. So it's not exactly a neutral, apolitical organization like they like to frame themselves as. And
Right.
so yeah.
So it runs similarly to all the proof of stake, centrally planned organizations that we see in the West and elsewhere in the world. And these organizations, as we're going to talk about later today, like, they have a way of kind of establishing arms that are very hard to deconstruct. Right. And they
really do. Yeah.
It's the way, in my eyes, this is the way proof of stake fends off entropy. It has to grow. It has to take in more money, more capital, more resources, create more jobs. And now, if you take away some piece of it, their claim is really that, like, well, society will fall apart. We can't just abolish the IMF, right?
It's such a good point, man. I mean, IMF is so proof of stake. It's literally proof of stake. And they just add this complexity in the middle where nobody can really see what's going on, where the decisions are made. It's a good point.
Yeah, it's like a black box of politics.
Exactly. It's a black box.
Let's talk the proof of stake stuff now, because we saw the IMF release some footage like being very pro Ethereum. I want to wear I want to put on my tinfoil hat right now and just sort of throw out the idea of, where does Vitalik fit into the IMF sort of jigsaw puzzle that we've been explaining or talking about?
I don't know. He's somewhere. He's somewhere in that black box we just talked about in there. The first paper that I shared in that thread was titled like blockchain consensus mechanisms or something. And even just taking it at face level, they go through proof of work, they go through proof of stake, they go through delegated proof of stake, and then they go through a couple other more, stranger ones. But the tone in the proof of work one is so negative. Like, when you're just reading it, they just it's so negative. And then there's entire paragraphs where they just kind of shit on it for its energy usage and how it's not going to fit into our regulatory frameworks and just all these things. And then it gets to proof of stake, and there's like a little bit negativity. Like, it's like, yeah, it's kind of prone to centralization. It's kind of prone to, cartels being formed and the rich getting richer. But look at all these great things. It's not energy intensive. It's more decentralized, they say. It's harder to 51% attack, they said, falsely. And they just kind of like pump it up. And that's kind of what they do. They want to push proof of stake and slander proof of work, because I think it's because they know that proof of stake, they can have some control. they can have some control over the protocol, over changing the rules of the protocol, especially when they are right next to the money printer, where they can just print more money and then they can get more control in a proof of stake system. And so in terms of just the tone, I think in general, they're going to push proof of stake, especially if they get more pushback against the CBDC. I think they'll be like, all right, the public really hates the CBDC. We can't get away with that yet. So let's push this public proof of stake ones, and then we'll kind of take that over, probably turn it into a CBDC or something. Like that's kind of like my tinfoil hat a little bit, but that's what I read when I'm reading these papers in terms of just the overall tone.
Well, you also cite in this thread how they bring up that proof of work is prone to centralization. Forks make achieving settlement finality hard. And then the one thing that they bring up that was actually true was the proof of work's decentralization makes it more difficult to regulate. I mean, where are they drawing these BS facts and presenting it as truths? Like, are there sources they're sourcing out for this? Like, again, ignorance, because I didn't read it. I let you read it and tell me what it said.
Sure.
But
sure.
Yeah.
Well, not for those statements. There's no citations. And I think when in general, when you dig into these things, and I really encourage everybody to dig into these things. This is why I include the sources on purpose in everything I do, because I want people to go look at this themselves. When you look into the citations and you just do a couple clicks, like click through that citation, you'll find that it's so dubious what they're even citing to back up that point they made. It doesn't even make sense. There's a very like vague connection between what they said and what they cite. But the ones that you brought up, like it's prone to centralization because of mining pools. I'm like, okay, that's like, that's not true because miners can just switch mining pools pretty easily. Like that's the short answer. And you could say, yes, like there's been some more centralization of mining pools, but it's not prone to it and it's not trending that way because there was just Stratum V2 released and it has better hash, and we're working on improving this over time, and it will get better over time. But they're making it sound like it's going the wrong way and that it centralizes all this power in mining pools when it's just kind of false, right? And then the other one was forks achieve settlement finality or makes it hard. I'm like, that's technically true. Like, because if everything's forking, it does make finality hard. But in Bitcoin's history, obviously, who gives a shit about Bitcoin Cash? Who gives a shit about any of these forks? It hasn't affected Bitcoin's finality, but they make it sound like, oh, proof of work in Bitcoin, it's going to make things really hard with finality. So it's like a lawyer's game where you can say like technically it's true, but it's not really true for Bitcoin, but they're trying to make it sound like that. So that's kind of like, you have to peel this away. And that's why I share this stuff, because, you have to call them out on this shit, because the people are going to read this, like policymakers read this. And so just trying to get this out there to say, no, like this isn't technically right or correct, or, it's kind of exaggerating the truth or whatever.
And so, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the biggest sort of source for their argument, there being the IMF and the powers that be, is really rooted around this idea that proof of work is just using more electricity and more power than proof of stake would. But at the same time, even like you bring up, they literally write out that, hey, proof of stake lets the rich get richer. Proof of stake lets you have centralization and control over this. I mean, for them, they might actually look at that and be like, yeah, no, I want that. For the rest of the world, we look at it and see, no, that doesn't actually help or serve us. How do we feed that narrative to go wider while still combating the broader narrative of the energy flood that gets spun out?
Well, it kind of goes back to what I said before, which I mean, Bitcoin's energy use, it's inseparable from Bitcoin. Like if you remove the energy use of Bitcoin, in my opinion, it's no longer Bitcoin. And so it's completely necessary for it to function as a sound money, as a hard money. And so we haven't found a better way besides using energy to kind of create a level playing field that is resistant to corruption. Because energy kind of creates this very fair playing field where nobody can fake energy. So it's backed by the laws of physics. It's backed by the laws of thermodynamics. And so I think we have to get through to them that its energy use is imperative for it to function, And it's worth it. It's worth it that we have this sound digital money in the world that we live in today, in the environment of inflation and financial warfare that we have today. And I think just getting that out is really important. And then this idea that like there's so many other ideas of how, Bitcoin mining will drive innovation in the energy industry with, providing a flexible load for grids and all these more nuanced topics. I don't know if we should like start with those, but they are a big deal. Like I do believe that it is going to revolutionize the energy industry, and it is going to drive us forward, and it is going to make us more, cleaner or renewable or whatever you want to call it. So I think all of those narratives combined can be powerful, but I think we need to maybe standardize, kind of getting more professional research with good data. And the Bitcoin Mining Council, that's kind of their mission, and I think I kind of support that initiative because of that.
I want to play the other side of the coin for a little bit. I need to preface and say I'm fully supportive of the Bitcoin Mining Council. I love the work that they're doing, and it is vitally important for, I think, the growth of the Bitcoin ecosystem. But in the same vein, it's almost no different than the same research that the WEF or the IMF or whoever else wants to push forward, that pushes forward the narrative that they genuinely believe. And I almost want to push for someone independent of all of this. Obviously, Bitcoin will and can affect everyone from across the world. That's the point of Bitcoin. But to have someone independent with no ties to these government agencies and no direct ties to Bitcoin, would that not be a more valid claim or a valid marker for us to point to and say, look at the data that this research has shown versus look at the data that Bitcoin funded?
No, I think that's right. I think that's right, because obviously their bias, like the Bitcoin Mining Council, are going to come across as bias. And it's tricky though, because we need it. We need some kind of organization to come together, because these Bitcoin mining companies, a lot of them are kind of secretive about their operations, and for good reason. But we do need to combat the FUD. I think it's important. It can delay Bitcoinization. It could delay what we're trying to build here in this environment that's getting more scary by the day, to be honest with you. But so I think there's other organizations though. So I know the Bitcoin Policy Institute is a newer one. They're putting out one on ERCOT research, and they're trying to self-fund that. And then you have like Sat Center is another organization that's going to start putting out research as well. And so I think you're seeing this develop. I think you're going to see more and more of these independent research firms start to look into this stuff. And especially as more people become orange pilled, more people start to see why Bitcoin's important. I think you're going to see more researchers and more people in academia start to look at this thing seriously as an innovative technology.
I want to take an exit off of this freeway for a second and talk domestic Bitcoin issues, and specifically in as far as like public figures who are running for office talking about Bitcoin. We see it becoming an issue all across the country. Different races, from national Senate races to like your local politicians, are pushing forward Bitcoin legislation. I'm curious your thoughts and feelings just about this groundswelling that we've been seeing, especially over the course of the last like year.
Yeah, I think it's happening faster than a lot of people thought. I remember tweeting last year or something that, I do think Bitcoin's going to be debated in the next presidential election. Like, I think it's going to be a big topic. But I think it's important not to rush any legislation and try to stifle innovation. And I'm not optimistic that if regulation did come out, it wouldn't be very stupid, to be honest with you. Like, I don't think it would be smart regulation. I think there's more education that needs to be done. Now, I'm also hesitant to trust any politician. I think there's always a motive there. Like, are they actually for this technology and believe in Bitcoin, or are they just trying to get a new voter base? There's people like Cynthia Lummis that I do think gets it, and who is a good advocate and voice in the Senate, and she's pushed some good legislation. Caitlin Long in Wyoming and the people who she's worked with to push really good legislation in Wyoming that can be an example and a template for other states to adopt as well. She did a great job setting up the legislation there And she wasn't the only one. I think Tyler Lindholm is another one. And I think actually Trace Mayer was involved with a lot of that. So they did a great job of protecting, wallets, protecting self-ownership. And I think that's really important for other states to look at and be like, hey, I actually got off the phone with this guy running for Congress yesterday in New Hampshire, and he talked about the Wyoming legislation. And then you have people like Bruce Fenton running for Senate in New Hampshire as well. And that dude's an OG Bitcoiner, right? And so I think we're going to see more and more people join the political debates who are Bitcoiners, and props to them for doing that, because I sure as hell have no interest of going into politics. So, that's kind of how I see it developing.
I love and was cheering over here when you were talking about, like, I don't trust any of these jackasses. And you're absolutely right. Like, Eric Adams is the perfect example of, I'm going to take my first mayor paycheck in Bitcoin. And not even a week later, it's going to be Bitcoin in it and Ethereum, but we're going to be the hub for blockchain technology. And then now the legislation they're putting through is stifling innovation and potentially can stop miners from operating in this entire state.
Yeah.
All on the heels of the mayor of the largest city of that state running on a platform that, hey, I'm pro Bitcoin, I'm pro this technology, when in fact it played out like a grift for votes. So, like,
yeah,
how do we as citizens, who, this is more direct in my opinion than IMF, where if we had maybe bought into or caught this early enough, we could have called out someone like an Eric Adams, or, like, I'm not shy to say it, someone like a Ted Cruz, who is literally just, what's the latest thing that I can get enough votes to keep my job? I'm not shy about saying shit like that. How do we call those people out in the right, respectful way?
Yeah, I mean, when you said that, I thought about, I think there's, I don't know if she's a senator or congresswoman from Arizona, Wendy Rogers, but she came out and she said, like, Bitcoin. And then, like, the next day, literally, like, crypto. And then she just gets slammed in the replies, right? And so there's this conflation of Bitcoin and crypto. It's something that we have to deal with at Swan all the time with clients, trying to separate Bitcoin from this speculative mania full of, scams and stuff in crypto, and why they're different. And so I know it's kind of a cop-out answer, but it's just education. It really is. Really not just educating politicians, but educating their constituents. So grassroots, going to meetups, talking to people, putting out writing, works, podcasts, videos, the education of Bitcoin was grassroots, just like Bitcoin's adoption. It came from plebs, brilliant plebs putting out blog posts, and, like, that'll continue. And that's grown so much. I mean, Bitcoin Magazine, you guys do an amazing job, and you guys have grown incredible amount in the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, so I just see that continuing. I see, that Bitcoin message and the people that bring that message getting bigger and bigger platforms. And that's kind of what you see Saylor going on Fox News now, and you see Nick Carter on Fox News now. And so I think it'll start to snowball from there. And, I think Bitcoiners have truth on their side, and I think the truth gets out eventually. So it's just going to take some work.
Also, shout out to Swan and how much your company has grown. I mean, do you guys still do the shitcoin redemption program to get rid of your shitcoins for more Bitcoin?
Yeah, we do actually. Yep. If any of our clients want to ditch their Ethereum or whatever, yeah, you can use our shit program and dump it for Bitcoin.
I love that. That's a necessity in this world of just pure chaos. I'm kind of curious, and there's a thought that I kind of want to have that may have just escaped my brain, and I'm just rambling for a hot second while I try to figure this out. But in the lens of local politicians in particular, what is sort of the best course of action? Because we're starting to see, as you mentioned, like, a lot of people on Fox News, shout out Uncle Marty as well for getting invited on Tucker Carlson.
Yeah,
Like,
dude.
you see Fox News and a lot of conservatives, and it feeds into the financially conservative mindset of, like, my money is my money, get the state away from it. And, like, that feeds into that mentality. But Bitcoin is meant to be for everyone.
So how do we try to expand that narrative and like let people on both sides of the aisle kind of see that? Like what are ways that you personally think could feed into maybe a more mainstream to the left kind of ideology or idea?
Yeah, this goes, I think when you're orange pilling somebody in general, like the first step you should think to yourself is know your audience, know where they're coming from. And that's really important to dig into getting buy-in. And so Bitcoin is a bipartisan issue, and it does speak to the values of both sides of the parties, different values. You already mentioned the ones on the conservative side. The Democrat side is the financial inclusion. I mean, like there's still, I think 10% of Americans don't have bank accounts. Bitcoin doesn't discriminate against race, against socioeconomic status, sexual orientation. Bitcoin's for everybody, and it can really do a lot of wonders for the poorest amongst us in terms of also just access. So when you have the poorest who is kind of accredited investor laws, they don't have opportunities like the rich, when they can just buy some Bitcoin and benefit from its and continued adoption and price appreciation, it can really do wonders for the inequality that we see throughout the entire society right now. And I think that really speaks to the Democrat values. So that's just like kind of one example, but I think knowing your audience is really important when you're talking to somebody to get them to buy into Bitcoin, and then kind of, figuring out where their bottlenecks are and understanding where their holdups are, whether that is the criminal stuff or the energy stuff. Like knowing if you're going to be talking to somebody who's a Democrat, they're probably going to be really pro-environment, and you better be ready to answer those questions and really well to kind of calm, get their concerns out of the way and address them in a way that's respectful. But you have to know your stuff. You have to know your data, and you have to, make the case for it. It's not enough to say like you're stupid. That's not how you're going to get buy-in here. So I think it's just being smart about it.
What in your Thank you for that. I definitely think it has to be a case by case basis, like going down the rabbit hole of this is all the reasons why you should just believe all the reasons. It'll never work. It's absolutely finding and prioritizing what that individual you're talking to cares about. I'm curious your thoughts on what do you think could help propel Bitcoin forward in the best possible way for it to reach its full potential? Do you think having the government step in and create guardrails around Bitcoin and as a result, the larger and broader crypto market? Or do you think just letting it grow as it has been growing for the last, what are we now, 13 years, and let it continue to prosper as it sees fit? What, in your opinion, would be the best course of action?
I mean, I would like the government to stay the hell out of it as long as possible. Like seriously, just let us keep building, let us keep growing this from like I said, the grassroots on up. Don't stifle innovation. I think they could take some lessons from what happened with the internet. They did step back and allow the internet to grow, and look what happened, right? So I would like them to just stay the hell out of our way. And then it just comes to what is the best thing for Bitcoin right now. There's a lot of, obviously, education. I've talked about that a lot, but there's been a lot of improvements in user, UX lately with the Lightning Network and innovation. I think there needs to be a lot of building and improvements on the private key management side. And I'll leave that for shadowy supercoders and people smarter than I am to figure out that. But I think that's kind of a big part of Bitcoin is self-custody. I mean, it's vital to Bitcoin. And that's why, at Swan, we try to just encourage everyone to take self-custody, try to make it as easy as possible, because it's better for the network. It's better for people. It's about the ethos of Bitcoin. And I think it needs to be easier or somehow, right now we're in the early days and it's still kind of clunky, but I think it will get better. I just walked my brothers and my father through self-custody, and it was great. I felt good to do that, but I walked away with it being like, this probably needs to get better before we're going to see like a ton of widespread adoption of people taking self-custody of their private keys and stuff like that.
So I want to, before we finish up on just sort of the thematic or the conversation around policy, especially domestic policy in particular. Um, you've talked now a lot about self-custody, and I'm curious what you would like to see develop beyond just sort of helping people understand what is maybe a technological development that you would like to see out of that space as well.
Oh man. See, this is
Without
where
you
the
giving
shadowy super coders who are smarter than I am are probably have better answers than I do, man. I'm not the most technical person, but for me, one of the things that I think needs to be built or improved upon is inheritance. It's really important when we talk to boomers. It's top of their mind. They want to know what happens when I die with this stuff. And really, there's only like one book by Pamela Morgan, which was written, I think, in like 2017 or 2018, that really digs into crypto and inheritance planning. And I know that I think it's something with multi-sigs. I think that's going to be a part of it for sure. That seems to be where things are going. But that's just one holdup where I see where like we need to get this inheritance thing figured out for the older people who have a ton of wealth, that are going to be transferring their Bitcoin over to their kids. And so it's just kind of a holdup that I see.
dig it. Let's the biggest wealth transfer ever in the history of society is on the cusp of happening when all these boomers finally start giving their children the money that they've been hoarding and hiding from the society and economy as we know it.
For sure.
I want to talk a lot more with you about the IMF papers, and in particular now the conversation around Bitcoin being used for illegal and illicit activities. We've seen time and time again, what was it, the Colonial Pipeline hack, where the hackers demanded to get paid in Bitcoin. And little did they realize the Bitcoin blockchain is public. And if people really want to find out who you are, i.e., a government you stole millions upon millions of dollars from, they'll find you. Or this what are the two hackers that like definitely did not actually steal all that Bitcoin and just bought it at a discount? That couple, whatever the company that they stole from,
Oh, Bitfinex.
Bitfinex.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Like we're seeing example out of example come out that actually know if you try to use Bitcoin for illegal activities, you can and probably will get caught. So talk to us about like the narrative that you've been seeing in the IMF and like how we in Bitcoin can push forward the right stories to combat that.
Yeah, this is one of the big, I don't know, battlegrounds, I guess you could say, because every single organization, like it doesn't matter, like it could be the Treasury, it was the Fed, it was European Central Bank, like IMF. They always say that we can't have anonymous, CBDCs or anonymous projects because they have to stop money laundering or illicit activity. And it's one of those things where on the surface, people are like, oh yeah. We shouldn't let that happen. Right. But that's how they justify not having privacy. And if you look deeper into that, it's just an excuse to not have privacy because they don't stop the crime anyway. AML KYC policies have been completely ineffective. And I've looked deeply into that. And there's one guy, the Dr. Ron Paul, who crunched all the numbers. He did his PhD on the ineffectiveness of AML KYC. And he's like, yeah, I found it hard to get a job in the banking system after I had that PhD thesis. But I reached out to him. I was like, thanks for your work. And he's like, are you talking to me? Because, no, I didn't know anybody really read my work. And I was like, oh, you're going to find a community in the Bitcoin community because we dig that stuff. But his work found that AML policies have impacted 0.05% of criminal finances in the last, I think 30 years since it's been going on. And so the IMF justifies not having privacy features to say that they're going to combat money laundering when the policies haven't worked for 30 years. And so why are they doing this? Because it appears to be more about control than stopping crime, because they can't do it anyway. They failed at it for 30 years, but they're saying that they can't have privacy in it. So, it really bugs me because there also isn't like a put up in a mirror, like you said, where dollars are used for criminal activity more than Bitcoin. You're almost a stupid criminal if you use Bitcoin right now, due to the pseudonymous nature and the ability to trace. And you can even tell with these hacks if they're actually like legit hackers or not, because the legit ones will use coin joins and know how to kind of wash the Bitcoin a little bit, and it takes more technical expertise. But a lot of these hackers are usually like these Bitfinex people. They're just kind of like kids who figured out a way to do it, and then they have all this money and they're like, what do we do with this? Because you can't really move it, it's flagged. And I think those Bitfinex hackers were like using $100 gift cards and just living off that, even though they had $7 billion in hacked Bitcoin. So yeah, so it bugs me because it's just a justification for regulatory overreach, for not having privacy features, and that's their excuse that they use, and that's what they all use. All of these institutions use that excuse.
Sam, do you mind repeating the research paper that you had mentioned just now?
Well, you mean the AML KYC one?
Yeah,
I would just follow Dr. Ron Paul on Twitter. He has all of his research pinned to his account, and it's one of his papers. He's had like 8 or 9 of them, but when anybody like mentions that statistic of how ineffective, it's always his research, because he was the only one that actually has run the numbers. So I would just either Google Dr. Ron Paul, AML. I think it's ineffective AML. He says that those policies are moving towards infinite costs and zero effectiveness. That's what they move towards, because they basically cause a ton of fines where banks are trying to comply with these policies, even though they don't work. And then they pass off those fines to the consumers in increased fees and the bank. So it causes all these problems, and it doesn't do anything to stop the crime. And now they're just trying to continue to collect information, create honeypots of data, all these negative externalities from these policies that don't work. And so check out Dr. Ron Paul. I think he's an underfollowed dude who's done some great research.
Awesome.
For everyone who was asking in the chat, POL, not PAUL.
Yeah, different Ron Paul.
I was like, wait a minute, this
He's
definitely isn't the guy we're talking about.
Yeah, another cool Ron Paul, man.
I threw it in the chat as well, his Twitter account, so be sure to give him a follow.
Cool.
Let's unpack a little bit of this, because like, look, you want to get away with anything right now is the best time in the world to use cash, show up anywhere you want to go to wearing a mask and a hat, and then all of a sudden, like, no, you really can't be like doxxed in that traditional sense, if you will. And yet once you start using the internet payment rails, whether it be traditional credit cards or Bitcoin, all of a sudden your internet identity is now known, or at least able to be seen. Why is it so hard for these idiots to grasp that? Like, what is it? Just they don't understand the internet still 40 plus years later? I guess not everyone had internet access 40 years ago, but my point aside.
Why do they, can you repeat that question? Sorry.
Why do they buy into this narrative when it seems, at least to those of us who understand the technology well enough, and just, I think technology in general, like even if you were to use a credit card, like that's traced back to you. But if you use cash, it's not. So why do they buy into that? Do they just genuinely not understand even that basic dichotomy between credit cards and cash?
Yeah.
In your opinion?
In my opinion, yeah, I don't know if they do. I mean, a lot of these policymakers, and I respect my elders, but there are a lot of older people who, they usually don't understand technology as well. So it's hard for them to wrap their heads around some of this stuff. And if you listen to any of those like committees on technology with those like older senators over the last couple of years, I mean, it's pretty crazy how far behind they are with the questions they ask, like, Mark Zuckerberg, or whenever they had the Google guy in front of them. Like it's pretty like concerning, I would say. So I don't know if they even understand that level. I don't know if they want to, like, that's when it comes down to like, do they know, and that they just don't care, and they just think Bitcoin, they don't want to learn. They think that Bitcoin's a shadowy thing that's used by criminals, and that's what the mainstream media has pumped for 10 years against Bitcoin. They still, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, like, it's still negatively skewed. It's gotten a little bit better because they can't really say that it's just like this bubble anymore because it's stuck around and it's gone up in price. But they still like kind of shit on Bitcoin pretty consistently, and that's what these guys are reading. They've been reading mainstream media on Bitcoin for the last 10 years. They're not in Medium reading blog posts of plebs, or I don't know if they're on Bitcoin Magazine, but I think they just kind of been influenced to think that this thing's bad. It's used by criminals, and they also it's like the check your financial privilege. It's like the Alex Gladstein, where they live in this bubble, can't understand why somebody in a country with an authoritarian regime, with capital controls and seizures and double-digit inflation, why Bitcoin would matter to them. So it's a little bit of all of that wrapped in one thing, I think.
I'm staring at these two charts, on the first one being the illicit share of all cryptocurrency transaction volume from 2017 to 2021, and then the ASML scorecard. For this sort of research from Chain Analysis, like, again, this is just further validating the claims and what you are bringing up. What are the facts the IMF is then using to discount this? Or is it, again, just speculation on their part?
It's a little bit of both. I think I can't remember exactly what they cite for this stuff. Oh, I do know one. Okay, actually, they cited, this wasn't the IMF, but you got to understand, these people all use the same citations, the same studies. But the ECB came out with this just terrible letter this week about Bitcoin, just full of FUD. And in it, they said that illegal activity makes up 45% of crypto transactions, and 45%. And then you go to the citation, and in the citation, there's a little caveat. There's like words under the citation that said, well, this one guy said it ranged from 45% to 0.05%. But they in the paper, they just say 45%. And who besides like me is going to go down to the citations to double check if that's bullshit? Nobody. So everyone's like, oh, I guess 45% of crypto volumes are used by criminals. And that's what they do. They basically take one study, and then they look at the range. They pick the highest like range that they found. And then they, at the bottom in the citations, they kind of walk back their position, say, well, this is a little different. And then they actually cited a different study in that same little addendum. They said, and this one only found 0.015%, the one that I talk about. So it's disingenuous, essentially. And that's what they do. And so like in these papers, I just thought it was absolutely ridiculous that they brought up the financing of weapons of mass destruction. Like they're taking strategy from the Bush administration or something. And so I was like, where are these weapons of mass destruction that are financed by virtual assets? Like, please tell me. And then I went through the citations and I clicked through. I ended up in this, Department of Defense paper that basically connected some hackers from North Korea who hacked a crypto exchange. They made the giant leap in thinking that just because the hackers of these cryptocurrency exchanges were North Korean, that all of those funds were being used because North Korea is also increasing its nuclear capabilities. So those funds must be funding weapons of mass destructions. Like, they made that giant leap. And nobody would know that unless you're like me, who click through 4 or 5 links to find out why they're saying that virtual assets are financing. And it just doesn't make any sense. And there's no direct connection, but they get away with saying that in the paper. And of course, if you're reading the paper, you're going to say like, oh my God, Bitcoin's, like financing nuclear warheads. Like, that's terrible. So it's disingenuous and it's shitty researching, and they should be embarrassed. If it's not malicious, then they should be embarrassed with how incompetent they are.
Honestly, Chris, you should just say this out loud, but I'll read it too. Like, you are doing God's work out there, like with what you're doing.
I was just saying, I just messaged Q. I'm like, Sam's out here doing the Lord's work for all of the Bitcoin and Bitcoin community in general.
I don't know about that, man, but just doing my part. Just doing my part.
No, I mean, look, I'll admit, even when I do take the time to read like some of the bullshit that gets spun out by the IMF, WEF, or whatever wants to antagonize Bitcoin, like, do I do my due diligence enough to like read every single source they cite and comb through it? Like, unfortunately, no. I read too much stuff to do that with everything I do. There are moments I do that, but honestly, I could definitely be a lot better. And I'm, again, from a place of ignorance, having not read this piece, I'm speculating that they don't bring up the fact that, the US is the biggest arms dealer in the world, and we sell weapons to literally every single one of our fucking enemies. Let me put on, this isn't even tinfoil hat time. This is like me as an Iranian citizen standing up for all of the fucking Middle East, because Bush Sr. and Cheney and all those jackasses were literally selling weapons of mass destruction to Iraq during the Iran-Iraq war. Fast forward 10 plus years later, and all of a sudden, Cheney is still in this off. Cheney still has power. It's Bush Jr. And hey, didn't we sell weapons of mass destruction to Iraq? They've got to have them still. They got them somewhere. All right, valid enough. That's my mini rant right now, but literally the whole time, that's all I'm thinking.
Well, I think it's power. So one of the things though is it's easy to get called out like, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist here. I think it's extremely powerful to use their own work against them. So dig into their publications and quote them and say, like, this isn't just me saying this. Look at what they said in this, and then make up your own mind. But I think it's extremely powerful to look into their citations, look into their publications, and then use it against them and say, hey, we're not just saying that they're going to create a surveillance state with CBDCs. Look at what they said. They're literally either they don't think it's that bad of a thing at all, which is possible. They think they're doing God's work, or they just think they have so much hubris that they're like, I don't even care if we make all of our plans transparent. But I think it's super powerful to use their own work against them. And I think more people should do it.
You've spoken to me in such a way, Sam, that I now have to pick up writing again. On the CBDC topic, like in your thread, you bring up how the IMF is specifically citing 6 CBDC projects that have moved forward at a very rapid rate. And the ones they're citing are countries like China or a country like Canada, that we've seen the way they will act towards citizens that do or believe things that they don't think, or those who are in power don't agree with. So talk to us a little bit about like what that spin up of CBDC looks like from the IMF's perspective.
Yeah, so this is where the Bank of International Settlements is actually the one really doing the work in the CBDC research, and they're kind of guiding through their innovation hub, which the IMF is part of. They're all just kind of like together, but the IMF's role with the CBDCs was they just did a little like review over what's going on, and they advise and share research on their findings of what's going on in the CBDCs. And so in this paper, they go over 6 projects that are going on, because there's a push to get one global CBDC system, because if every country has a single CBDC, the whole thing doesn't work. I mean, then it's just a bunch of, they're all in silos. And so they want to get one global CBDC. So there's a lot of collaboration happening between countries. And so this one looked at the 6 most advanced ones, which was China, Sweden, the Bahamas, I think like Uruguay. But basically, there's 2 things that I thought were like kind of eyebrow raising. One is that none of them had protected the user privacy because of what we just talked about. They blame illicit activity and money laundering. And so they actually, they give anonymity to lower tier citizens. And so I just thought it was absolutely ridiculous that these central banks, dictate who is considered lower tier, like a class society or something, but they give them anonymity if they don't have an ID to sign up to the CBDC to get them in. So they want to get them all in to this CBDC system. So they give anonymity for the lower tier people, but they don't give it to anybody else who is either richer or has, already has an ID. And so that was like the two big things. And then I think just like the collaboration between central banks is concerning because they talked about this before. It's when you have one single CBDC, it leads to questions like who's in charge here. It's going to be one of these large unelected global financial institutions that have no oversight or accountability. And they say there'll be one playbook, but they don't say who's going to write that playbook, and they don't say who's going to enforce it. So that was that kind of paper. And they're obviously really happy. They're really excited about CBDCs. And I think anybody who's even remotely into freedom or privacy should absolutely hate CBDCs, like absolutely hate them. And so, yeah, that was that paper. It is what it is, but that's what Bitcoin solves. And that's like the two fork in the roads. Like that's where we're headed. It's either CBDCs or freedom money, and choose your team.
I mean, we also see a lot of the CBDC conversation domestically. What is it? Terra, that bullshit that's now backed by Bitcoin as well, but it's really
the stable, the algo stable coin.
Yeah, Luna, Terra, whatever it's called. Like, see how much I really care about bullshit that gets spun out.
Wait, Q. Can I chime in on that?
Because I know you don't agree with me.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like it's a shitcoin, but I think it's like its use case depends on who you are, like anything else. Like there are trade-offs to going all in Bitcoin, and here we're very financially privileged, as we've all been reminded by Alex Gladstein. If your CPI is like 50 or 100% in a year, and you're living paycheck to paycheck, you can't tolerate. It's harder to tolerate Bitcoin's volatility. So actually, I would argue that bringing these stable coins on top of Bitcoin and giving them at least like the security, a little bit of the network security that Bitcoin has, and taking them out of the hands of like centralized entities and venture capitalists could be a good thing for people living in South America, living in Africa, who can't tolerate Bitcoin's volatility, and they need to switch out of a national currency or a number of stable coins just to live their life, just to have their checking account. So I do see a real positive use case there, and I'd rather see that technology come home to roost on Bitcoin.
Yeah, Alex, quick thing. Do you just want to elaborate on Terra real quick? It stands for what? Taproot Activated, or I forget the acronym for it again.
Yeah, so Terra is basically, so we haven't actually seen it used yet, but Lightning Labs has developed like tooling around it such that you can have stable coins on top of Lightning and on top of Bitcoin. So that would be kind of like a layer 3 implementation. But that would allow you to, with the security and privacy of Taproot, jump in and out of stable coins. Like from a Bitcoin, while also enjoying a Bitcoin standard generally. So yeah, I think it's a great thing.
I hear you, man. Like it's a little bit privileged for us if they're in that high of inflation and they have to pay their bills with how volatile Bitcoin still is, to expect them to adopt a Bitcoin standard. I understand that completely.
Yeah, like I don't think Terra, I can't see myself using it. I can't see really a use case for any of us using it unless one of these stable coins is gonna go parabolic or something and you're gonna YOLO into it. But that's not usually how they're supposed to work, right? So I don't know, just food for thought.
I liked Pierre Rochard had a really good take though. He's like, it's a little bit of financial privilege on our part to think that they can't save in Bitcoin, given their inflation. Or that they wouldn't want to. And then that they also, these stable coins have built in inflation. So, they could just be volatile on the downside with zero upside that Bitcoin presents. So there's like a little bit of an argument there that I liked. I didn't hear that until Pierre said that on a podcast on Stefan Livera's podcast last week, but I thought that was kind of an interesting point.
Yeah. I think that that has legs. Like I think that's also correct. I would say, if anything, the Terra technology allows people more freedom of choice natively on Bitcoin. So that's a good thing. And then, time will tell. We'll let the markets decide what its use case is and how functional it is.
For sure.
Have you guys heard of it? And I'm trying to look up what it's exactly called. So Alex McShane lookalike Brian Armstrong was on the All In podcast last week. And he was on and they were talking a little bit about just like Coinbase's business in general, but he brought up a very interesting like third type of sort of token beyond just stable coins and then cryptocurrencies, where he lumped in Bitcoin, or avoided talking about Bitcoin, in my opinion. And there's like this new way to potentially like predetermine inflation. And so as a result, you can then sort of like negate or counteract the effects of inflation. But it sounded a lot like what they really just wanted to do was create some sort of a price fixing situation where it's like, hey, a gallon of milk is going to cost one of these tokens or half of this token, regardless of what the outside price of both of these items are.
That's the death knell of an economy right there.
Dude, that's what I'm saying. Like, I'm doing a really bad job. I'm doing a really bad job of explaining it. And I'm like in real time trying to pull up. It was literally just like last week's episode with Brian Armstrong. Like, it's in the middle 30 minutes of the episode. That's as much as I can.
So more of a bona fide scam. I'm still cracking up. I laugh every day thinking about the Sam Bankman-Fried quote and the black box Ponzi that he was talking about.
Yeah, listen to that too, man.
Just outed himself. So proud.
Wait, I don't know what you just described, but it sounded like he's trying to create a tokenized Coinbase price index, like CPI or some shit.
Dude,
like
genuinely, I'm trying to pull up like if there is a.
Well, let's say in the interim, price fixing is in all cases bad, and CPI is in all cases number one bullshit.
Right,
and the
good
reason,
luck, man. Good luck. Glad you got your priorities straight over there at Coinbase.
The reason is if we haven't reiterated enough, like CPI, like, okay, you make some arbitrary basket of goods, right? Okay, what happens when the price of steak doubles? I'm not going to be eating steak. I'm going to start eating Soylent bullshit. So
Coinbase
hedonic
steak? Adjustments, man.
Well, yeah. These like they don't build in these hedonic adjustments, and it's just moving the goalposts. So it's not a measurement of anything.
Yeah,
right.
There's no constants.
In the 90s, they replaced steak with chicken, and then I think chicken was getting too expensive, so they replaced it with ground beef. So like, yeah, they just keep
and now it's going to be an Impossible Burger by the end of the year.
Yeah, it's going to be the bug index.
But the scary thing is the expectation actually becomes that you eat that food. Like, think about all the marketing around this fucking veganism, like all these bullshit like supplements that are just artificial food. Like it's nutrients.
It's a new product to market. Exactly.
It's a whole new centralized economy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the people that can afford steak, they're still going to sell steak at now a premium. And then it's like, well, now if you can't afford that, then you got chicken. Oh, you can't afford that. Then you afford ground beef. You can't afford that. You got bug burgers or possible beef burgers, whatever it is.
Yeah, and back to Q's point, like a few weeks ago, like because of wheat supply and fertilizer fuckery, now actually I can't get that good price from my local butcher anymore. It's starting to climb a little bit, so I'm feeling it.
That's wild. I know Kit, not to dox her, but I know she's done kind of like the beef initiative, and like she's like reached out to local ranchers and butchers and farmers and stuff. And I know the guy tagged her on Twitter and a bunch of other Bitcoiners, I believe, about how he has a cut of beef and he's distributing it to them. Like, so I guess it's kind of like they have to go out to them to pick them up. But Sam, I don't know if you were on that list, if you're in that area.
No, man, I got to get in that. Kit got me, I met her for a coffee the other weekend. She got me down the seed oil rabbit hole. so I'm in that right now. And I was like, holy shit, Kit, like, I gotta go talk to my butcher, you know.
Have you had a chance to read the Fiat Standard yet, Sam?
I'm like halfway through it, man. I got a problem with buying books and then reading about half of them and then getting into another book. So I liked it a lot. It just no, I enjoyed it. I think you make some great points, man. I think it's all connected.
Yeah. If you get through I think it's part 2. you'll get into the fiat food and the Harvard nutritional school and where a lot of this American like centralized food industry bullshit comes
I,
from. It's really
I think
interesting.
I think I stopped right before that, but now Kit has inspired me, so maybe I got to crack that thing back open.
I
For
think,
sure.
yeah, he even doesn't he talk about fiat engineering and fiat science? The fiat science is more different, but I think he talks about fiat engineering, which is kind of which I fled to come to Bitcoin Magazine to do this now.
Nice.
Yep, 100%.
Q, you
Okay.
look like you're lost in thought. We'll buy you some more time.
You're muted, Q.
Yeah.
Oh, he's there.
You gotta-
1 second.
I'm literally watching this old episode and like scanning through the closed captions of a flat coin. Boom.
Where's
I
our
told you I figured it out. So it's called a
flat
flat
coin?
coin. There's a new type of cryptocurrency being introduced, and it's called a flat coin. And it's literally meant to keep prices flat. It's literally the response to inflation. I kid you fucking not. Balaji is the one that they're citing in this tweet right now.
Where
It's
can I buy
literally-
this?
Dude, Balaji.
The
Where can I buy
Bitcoin
this?
price, the Bitcoin price has me going all in on flat coin right about
I'm dumping all my sats.
now.
Go flat coin.
Like,
Dude, Balaji was talking about a Twitter coin too, man. You see that?
like, no, I didn't see that.
Oh, he's talking
Everyone's
about.
losing a lot.
Yeah, dude. He's trying to get Elon to do a drop, a Twitter coin. You know.
I will sell that immediately.
Like, are we fans of Elon buying Twitter, and like, do we think the deal will close? Because I've lost the plot at this point of the conversation.
Oh, I thought I did close.
It has not.
So
Oh,
there's so I got a little thing about it here. So there's this nonprofit organization called the Open Market Institute, and they did the exact same thing we talked about, which is they brought together 73 companies to talk shit about Bitcoin's environmental footprint, and they basically demanded that the Congress do everything. It was a letter to Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer that Congress stop them with regulatory action to stop the climate destruction of proof of work. And they cite like all the more at all. They cite Alex Arise, all those terrible studies, embarrassing for them. But that's the same one who wrote about Elon Musk taking over Twitter recently, calling for them to block the acquisition because it gives one man too much power and all this crap. And you're like, who the hell is this nonprofit? So it's not going through yet, and there's opposition because they said that he owns Twitter. He would own Twitter and then an other major platform, Starlink, which I don't really see that as a major platform. Like Starlink seems to be still getting out there and stuff. And so I think it's a really like bullshit excuse to try to block this acquisition. So I don't think they like free speech. I don't think they like freedom money. And there is like opposition, and I don't think it's gone through yet. So we'll see what happens.
Sam, you would know better, but isn't Starlink just like internet access though? That's not really a platform per se.
Exactly. It's like complete bullshit. Like it's the adoption's not even there yet. Like I haven't even interacted with Starlink. I don't even know what's going on really with it. So it's still growing. And then yeah, it's just a internet provider. So they're saying that because he owns that platform, he can't own another major internet platform. So
You want to know why Starlink is necessary? Because in America, I will even dox the like suburb that my family lives in of Palos Verdes. There is only one internet provider, Cox. No other internet provider is able to reach because it's so like finicky. It's on a peninsula. Like, I don't know, whatever BS reasons they want to give, they give us as to why there's a literal monopoly in this town. But now with Starlink, you're able to introduce competitive pricing. Like shit, I'd rather pay the $500 to actually just get all the equipment and set up Starlink in my parents' home than continue to have to deal with like the nightmare that is Cox, plain and simple.
Sure.
And I'm just gonna keep saying Cox on the show. But like that competitive advantage, what these companies are providing is the launching off point. Like I can't interact with you guys or everyone who's at home watching without that access to the internet. So it's the argument is not, in my opinion, it's not, is invalid a word? No, it's not valid, or it's not invalid, where like it's essentially a lower layer of the internet protocol. Twitter is what, layer 4 or 5, because you have the iOS layer below it, and then you have like the actual internet connection. Like Bitcoin is that layer 1, Lightning layer 2. And I'm a bigger proponent of scrap Twitter, from literally rip it all apart and then rebuild it as layer 3 on Lightning. Because then you don't need to operate on Apple iOS stuff. You don't need to operate on Google's Android or whatever stuff that they have. And then you really can introduce like the orange checkmark system. You can prevent bots. Fine. There's a new friction and barrier to entry, but that's probably for the best, in my opinion. But that's just my opinion, not a $44 billion man's opinion.
Personally, I'm not that excited about it. I said something in a tweet that I'm like, I'm not going to get excited until I see some proof of work. Like he can say he's going to do all this shit and it's going to be great for freedom of speech, but you're still giving it to one man. And I don't trust Elon. Like I just don't. I think he's kind of coming around and some of the ideas are better than when he was like pumping Doge and shit. But yeah, I'm going to have to see some proof of work, man, before I get excited about him owning it as opposed to what it is. I mean, we'll see what happens.
I mean, look, I think we've got to come to terms with the fact that Doge is going to be incorporated into Twitter in some way, shape, or form. Like whether or not we like that, like it's going to happen. The shitcoinery isn't going to stop either. And I'd like to, I think for the last few minutes, just kind of have that conversation of like, you know, we in Bitcoin are always pushing forward that narrative of Bitcoin is different than crypto at large, but that broader narrative, unfortunately, isn't the case with the masses, and everything just gets lumped into crypto. Sam, like you help educate so many people. All of us just here in this conversation can be a testament to that. What are one or two things that you would say to people where they conflate Bitcoin into that crypto bubble, and how would you help them to see they're being separate?
You know, it's a tricky, that the problem is that it's kind of Brandolini's law where it's hard to explain in a simple way. I actually wrote like a 2-part series on the Swan blog about this. It's called Why Bitcoin's Different. And it's kind of longer. They're longer blog posts because it takes a little bit to explain, especially for a newcomer. So, you know, I like to share the Bitcoin monetary policy and how you can basically see that it's an algorithm, the way it's just stayed the same like that, and then compare it against Ethereum's, right? Because Ethereum's like this, there's like difficulty problems, and you basically can tell one is controlled by math and an algorithm, and the other is controlled by people. And that's kind of a big difference. And I think when you compare and contrast those two, people are like, oh, okay, so that's kind of the exact same thing that we already have. Like, why is that important? And then, you know, the energy aspect of it is what makes Bitcoin unique. I mean, you could say Ethereum still proof of work, I guess. Actually, more people should say that. I get kind of pissed off when people assume that it's proof of stake already because they haven't done that yet. But you know, Bitcoin's energy use is what makes it unique from all these other cryptocurrencies, and it's what allows it to, you know, maintain, you know, decentralization and censorship resistance and create a level playing field. And so I usually go into that a little bit, and then the fact that all these other coins have a founding team. It's very simple. Like if you have a founding team and you know who the founder is and they can exert influence over the protocol, it's not decentralized. It's not a spectrum like people try to make it out to be. It's either is or it's not. And the proof of it is in the pudding. If it hasn't changed, it's really difficult to change. It's decentralized. It's immutable. If anything could be changed, or if there's a founding team that could exert influence over the protocol, it's not decentralized. It's not censorship resistant. So knowing where Bitcoin has no leader and all these other cryptocurrencies have founding teams that can be called in front of Congress, and you know, everyone who knows Vitalik and he's on the cover of Time and they're like celebrating that, I'm like, that loses the whole plot. Like that basically proves that it's just a centralized garbage. It's just the same crap. So, you know, all of those reasons, I would kind of point people towards my blog posts. You know, I pull ideas from Jimmy Song, Nick Carter, a lot of other Bitcoiners, and I kind of try to distill it all in one blog post in a 2-part series. So check that out if you want to just grab some more ideas. But those are a couple points that I make usually.
Sam, where can we find this blog post other than just Googling Sam Callahan Swan blog posts?
Yeah, we actually have to work on like the searching for blog posts on Swan. But you could look at why Bitcoin is different and then Swan Bitcoin like in the Google search, and that should pull it up. And then you could just go to the actual blog post, the blog on the Swan website, and scroll down, and you should find them. They're in there. I think I posted them in like March or something. But yeah, check it out. I think it's important. It's like it bothers me at Swan. It bothers Corey. I know that because we have to talk about shitcoins at Swan, and it reminds me of when I worked in healthcare because people would come into me and they'd be like, "Oh my God, I'm screwed. My back's hurt. I read this thing on WebMD. I'm screwed." And like half of the first visit was just talking them off a cliff, being like, "Dude, you're fine. You're okay. Here's this," and then teaching them the truth. Whereas this is the same thing where they go like, "Oh, shitcoins are this," and I'm like, "All right, we gotta back you off this cliff right here, and then teach you the truth." And so it's kind of like a denial of service attack on Swan's time. Instead of talking about Bitcoin, we have to talk about these shitcoins. So that's kind of why I think a lot of us don't like them, because we would rather be educating people about important things like Bitcoin and self-custody and security and privacy practices. But we have to first kind of, back them out of the shitcoin narratives that they've been pushed by other people. So yeah, that's kind of my little rant, but yeah, check it out.
You're good, man. I threw into the comments in the chat box links to both part 1 and part 2. Be sure to check those out. I mean, if you're not following Sam on Twitter, also make sure you give him a follow. Where's the best place? I'm assuming Twitter, but where else? Where else is our audience to stay up to date with what you're doing and working on?
So Twitter is the best for sure. So at Sam Calla, SamCallah. And then you can check out that blog. I basically put out periodic pieces that I find interesting. If you're interested in what I write for our Swan Private, which is for our private clients, I write with Tomer Strolight and a couple other great writers, Lynn Alden. We put together a monthly research report. If you're interested in just seeing that, feel free to DM me. I'll send you last month's issues. Or if you're interested in just Swan Private as a service, let us know. But that's kind of where my work really resides in the Swan Private. And then the blog, and then Twitter. I'm always on Twitter, so you can just check me out there.
Awesome, man. Sam, thank you so much for joining us. We will be having Jimmy Song join us in a moment here.
Oh, nice.
We're gonna take a short commercial break down some news and notes. Sam, if you want to hang out and break down some updated current event news, you are more than welcome to stay and hang out with the three bozos. But otherwise, everyone at home, we're going to take a quick commercial break.
Guys, man, I probably have to bounce, but thanks a lot.
What is up? We are back. We are here. Yeah, it's just the three of us for a moment, and we're here to talk to you about the Bitcoin conference. If you're seeing this message now, it's probably because you didn't attend the Bitcoin conference. And this is specifically catered to those who did not attend. Why? We are in the final day of ticket pre-sales right now, guys. Tickets are only going to go up in price. Buy your tickets, lock them in right now. I don't want to hear complaints. Oh, but they're so expensive. Oh, but it's not in my favorite city. I don't give a shit. You missed out on the biggest and best Bitcoin conference, and we're making it as easy as possible for you. We're making it as cheap as possible for you. The tickets, honestly, will probably never be this cheap again. I think after a quick look at how cheap the tickets are at this moment in time, I don't think next year the pre-sale tickets will be this cheap. So lock in your tickets while you can. Today's the final day for pre-sale. $250 for GA and just $5,000 for the whale passes. All prices go up because number go up. So be sure to lock in those tickets now before they are done and sold out. Any thoughts on people attending the conference, guys?
Got to do it. Regardless of location, the future price is going to be higher than it is now. So, buy a ticket and you just might outperform Bitcoin. Even if you want to flip it,
Dude, that is valid. Like the ticket resale market for Bitcoin 22 tickets was hot. There's a genuine channel that we create dedicated in our Discord chat, devoted to people that we validate have real tickets to resell. We're completely fine with you doing that as well. So if that's your angle on it, like go for it. We're not going to stop you. We'll actually help you to make sure that, if you buy it from these type of people, you're not getting a scam or a faulty ticket. And then at the same time too, we'll help facilitate, make sure that you can actually sell off your ticket. Location is still TBD. All I can really confirm or tell you is that it will be in the United States. Where it will be depends on, I think everyone's mood the final day of deciding and locking it in. I'm still pushing for Vegas because I think 30,000 Bitcoiners flocking Las Vegas, Nevada is just a hellscape waiting to happen. Alex is very adamant on absolutely not.
Never going to happen.
Jimmy just got here, so I'll let him in.
Before we do that, we will take one more commercial break. But I also want to give a quick reminder that our team here, the Bitcoin Magazine video team, is looking to hire 2 new video editors. Come join Alex, myself, and Chris. We want people to work with us. We're expanding our team. If you're a video editor or have experience and you're watching this show and a tried and true Bitcoiner, we want to work with you. So make sure, shoot us a DM if you end up applying as well, especially if you're a viewer of the show. The jobs are available, listed on Bitcoiner Jobs as well as Bitcoin Magazine's website. So take a look. We're expanding the team and hope you join us. A quick commercial break and we'll be joined by Jimmy Song.
Yep.
What is up? We are back and we are joined by Bitcoin author, writer, and just one of my favorite people after meeting him at the conference and spending so much time with him. Jimmy Song, how are you doing, man?
I am doing great. So I had a little trouble connecting there for a little bit, but I'm now on and we're good to go. Let's talk about stuff, man. Let's do it.
let's jam it out. I mean, I think honestly, where we can start is exactly where we left off the conversation, where we were pretty much spending the first hour and a half today kind of breaking down the IMF, who the hell they are and why they get so much say in just everything. I'd love your just initial gut reaction to just hearing the 3 letters IMF.
Yeah, it's sort of an extension of the U.S. government because I think the way they say on their website that they collect funds for their operations is they basically collect some money from the U.S. and Europe and whatever, but it's mostly the U.S. So it's really kind of like an arm of the Fed. and it's money that's printed out of nothing. So it's just sort of there for their purposes. They have these things called special drawing rights, which are kind of like their own fiat currency. But other than a couple of central banks, no one really uses them in the way that you would expect. So what ends up happening is that they have they're a bank basically, and they have all these funds that they can use to lend out to these places, and that's what they use it as, a way to bribe them into compliance in some way, shape, or form. Usually they use it as a form of monetary imperialism. They'll lend out to these regimes and tell them how they have to spend it. It's a form, what they call financial austerity, but it's really, hey, you have to spend it the way we say. And unsurprisingly, a lot of the people that accept this money, they're the leaders of these countries, they'll embezzle a large amount of it. You can only spend like a certain percentage on infrastructure, for example, roads and hospitals and gutters and sewers and stuff like that, the stuff that everyone wants because they want to develop their country. Said it's only a small percentage. So what ends up happening is that inevitably they can't pay these loans back, and then they have to sell assets of that country, and it ends up in the hands of Western companies. There, a lot of them are called banana republics because Chiquita Banana at one point like owned a significant amount of land, right? And you're growing all these crops for Chiquita Banana so they could service the American market. That's what was essentially happening. It's a very sad state of affairs. I think it's horrible, and it's a form of monetary imperialism, and it's great for the countries that are practicing it because, in a sense, it's you don't have to fire a shot or have any soldiers or anything, but get all the benefits. Instead of people, like forcing them into indentured servitude, what you get is people coming over voluntarily because of monetary imbalances, and they'll work illegally in the United States, taking care of our lawns and building our houses instead of doing it back home. And that's the reality, is that we're taking their labor and their productive time to build up our society instead of them building up theirs. And it's I honestly, it's a moral humanitarian crisis that we don't really acknowledge or talk about, but it's nevertheless very real.
I mean, there's an interesting statistic that I was clued in on about just the fact that the US sort of net growth, and I'm forgetting the exact name of this terminology, but it incorporates births, deaths, and then net immigration. And the US has actually been declining now year over year as a result. And this kind of feeds into what you're talking about a little bit of, these people are finally seeing, hey, the land of prosperity, the American dream is not what it was. How does this now affect these other countries that we've been taking their labor and their resources and stopping their development? Does it feed into them, or does it feed into another power to allow those other powers to grow?
Yeah, it's interesting because the monetary imperialism is really an extension of colonialism from a while back. It's just less violent, but it's nevertheless still very oppressive. I've talked to Alex Gladstein about this quite a bit. One of the things that we don't recognize is like there are all these like former French colonies in Africa, and they're oppressed monetarily through the Central African franc, and it's controlled by the French central bank, and they could devalue it at any time. And it's no wonder that a lot of the people from those countries immigrate to France and, again, take care of their lawns and build their houses and provide cheap labor and build stuff in France rather than their home countries, right? He was even saying that about like Palestine and Israel. like essentially the way it worked was they got a lot more political freedom, but they got a lot less monetary freedom. And as a result, a lot of Palestinian laborers go build stuff in Israel rather than in Palestine, right? Like it's, and even China to a large degree is doing the same thing with the Belt and Road Initiative all over the world, where they're providing these loans and things like that, but it's really a way to get a lot of their resources. It's I guess it's always been that way, but we're under this illusion that things are a lot more fair right now because I don't know, because we're not pointing guns at them necessarily or something like that. But it's just as oppressive, and there's almost like a racist sort of way of looking at it. Oh, these people are just lazy. Why don't they pull themselves up by the bootstraps and like build their country and make it better? Well, I mean, they can't, and they can't because we're monetarily oppressing them. And a lot of these people like would build up stuff in their own country. It's just that we're taking their resources, particularly human capital, right? Like the best and the brightest come here to the US or to Europe or wherever, and we're taking advantage. It's morally repugnant, and it's something that most people don't think about. And it's all based on this monetary system of central bank backed fiat money.
And I'm curious if you feel like, we also see a lot of this humanitarian aid go out to these same regions that are depleted by the exact things that we're doing to cause them to require the aid. Is it almost like this, like, we got them sick, let's give them this medicine so we keep them sick system that we've essentially created? Or do you think there's a way to get out of this consistent cycle that we're seeing with some of these more developing nations?
Well, so I'm very skeptical about foreign aid, and I've been, I think, red pilled on charities and non-government organizations and things like that. Almost always, the money goes to some rent seekers that don't actually do very much on the ground, and they might feel good, or it's kind of almost like a psyop to make you feel like you're actually trying to benefit these countries rather than exploiting them. But they don't really do very much, and the people that run these things, they're not very good at doing business or making goods and services for the market, right? Like that's not, and this is why I generally try not to donate to like general charities. If I donate at all, it's to specific people that I believe in, rather than to large organizations, which are almost certainly going to waste a lot of money. So I've looked into a lot of these. Most of them don't spend the money very well. The results that they get in these places are abysmal. They'll claim, oh, we fed all these people or whatever. Well, what are you actually doing? Are you making them dependent on you, or are you actually teaching them to do something useful? Or are so I get very skeptical about like foreign aid and things like that because they don't generally work. And I mean, even here at home, I think San Francisco funds like all of these nonprofits, right? And like their homeless problems like the worst in the country, and they literally fund like 40 different homeless prevention like organization. None of it does anything. It's gotten much worse, and that tells you these people are probably rent seeking. They're probably not very good at what they're doing, even if they have like the right intentions, which I'm not certain that they do. Yeah, I don't see that as an excuse or whatever. I'm a libertarian for a reason. I've seen a lot of this stuff, and the best way to get people to have prosperity is to give them freedom so that they can go and do what they would do with the market, and have the incentives of the market are vastly superior to trying to set up some system of charity or dependence or something like that.
I want to now give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about, your most recent song report or song sheet, sorry, where you kind of talk about like the state's abuse of business. I'm just going to read the title. The state's abuse of business is inherited by consumers. Because I kind of think this feeds into what we're talking about. You hear all the policymakers kind of dictate to everyone, hey, this is what we want to see done. This is how things should operate. And in turn, it gets passed on to the businesses, who in turn pass it on to the citizens. So talk to us a little bit about this dynamic that you explained.
Yeah, so the article was ostensibly sort of like inspired by this difference between law and legislation. Most people think of them as the same thing. For me, it's very different. Legislation is what's centrally controlled and sort of like given down to the lessers or whatever, right? Like it'd be like a legislature making legislation that adds regulation or something like that. Law, at least for me, is very different. It's this idea of a social norm, or what I would call as a Christian like natural law. It's the very words common sense. If you think about it, it's common to people, right? It's a sense that we all share. That's what law, at least the way I conceive it, is. And the article was talking about how legislation has sort of corrupted law to a large degree, because when you have people, instead of like this bottom up social norm developing, which I think is very healthy, you have top down, hey, we're gonna tell you what you need to believe, or what things you need to obey, and so on. And the U.S. started very much on a more bottom-up basis, and it's gotten way more top-down over time. And my thesis is that it is legislation and regulation that causes that, where you give more people, fewer people, more control. And the way this happens is through, EEOC is the one organization that I point out. Like the intent is very noble, right? Like, and it's very deceiving oftentimes to judge organizations, especially government organizations, on their intent. But their intent and results are completely different. So their intent is, okay, we don't want you to discriminate against minorities or whatever. But the standard that they came up with is, if you have a disparate impact on different minorities or whatever, then you're going to be in violation. So you hire 10 salesmen. If the right number, if you're likely to hire a white person more than a black person as compared to the population, or the other way, then you're going to be found in violation, and we can, fine you or whatever. So this is like literally impossible to do for every single job. Like they're just like, imagine if they did that in the NFL, right? Like it'd be like, okay, we'd have to have way more white people. And
no, they do that though. They have a really weird rule about coaches. Every time there's a coaching
the
hire.
Rooney Rule, but at least they're like, and the EEOC probably could bring a lawsuit against them, but they don't, because the NFL owners donate a lot of money to political lobbying and stuff like that. But essentially, you have this rule where they could enforce it any which way. So like, you've given them tyrannical powers over any company in the United States, and every HR department has to kind of read the tea leaves and say, okay, What they really want is for me to hire more Black people. All right, I'm gonna do that, even if it means that I'm not going to make my business even if that means it makes my business less profitable. The risk inherent in getting like a fine from them would be way more than whatever I'd have to spend on hiring that. And this is the weird thing, is that the the original legislation doesn't even matter anymore. It becomes more about satisfying this small group of bureaucrats, and this sort of like trickles down, because at some point, like platforms like Twitter, and social networks, and like Facebook and YouTube or whatever, they all kind of read the same tea leaves too, and say, okay, well, if we don't enforce this thing, then they're probably going to bring some sort of action against us. So they start kicking off users that are questioning vaccine mandates, for example, or masking or whatever. And they're trying, again, this isn't like explicit or anything. The EEOC doesn't go, hey, you know what, you need to make sure you do that. And it might not even be the EEOC, right? It's the CDC or some government agency that has some more authority. It's like, all right, you're going to piss us off unless you're on our program. And this is where they start saying, okay, well, if we don't start becoming more woke, then we might get eliminated. So they use sort of like the power of legislation for their benefit too, and it's usually encoded in the user terms and services of these places, where they'll find you in violation, like not necessarily because you violated it, because essentially every user has violated it according to their terms and conditions. They're so broad and like arbitrary that you can find anyone in violation that you want, but you use that specifically to get rid of the people that you don't want. And there might not even be explicit terms around that, or even a government like desire for that. It's just a bunch of HR people reading tea leaves and saying, you know what, we need to get rid of these people on this platform because we perceive that to be more politically risky than doing something else. So you get this very weird dynamic where the tentacles of government go all the way down into these tech companies, into all of these corporations, and we're essentially forced to comply, where we become like trained to become sheep, and like experts at reading tea leaves of what people might want.
So I want to unpack a few things. Firstly, just the idea of bottom up and top down sort of government regulation. The EEOC is something that you bring up here. And to me, though, it reads and feels more like this is a bottom up entity, where if the powers that be didn't have to, or feel like they had an obligation to these people to make some sort of a signal, if you will, that hey, we're doing something, there's this group advocating for those who feel underrepresented, then in turn it goes from the bottom of those are the people that feel disenfranchised, the top responds accordingly. And you could almost put a parallel to, I'll use Twitter as an example of or actually, no, not Twitter. Apple is a great example, where they got rid of one of their chief executives because a lot of their employees felt like he aligned with beliefs that they didn't align with, and they made a stand against Apple and maybe I'm just misinterpreting the bottom up analogy that you've provided, but these aren't the decision makers. These are more the ground.
Yeah. So I would say that's more an instance of special interest getting the ear of the people in charge. So more the bottom up stuff that I'm talking about is natural law, and this is like, if you look at the history of English common law or law of the merchant and stuff like that, they figured out what the social norms were, right? And this is more discovered than like created through legislation. If you go to Britain, for example, or the UK, and you cut somebody in line, every judge will be like, that's not, you're violating social norms, you are at fault for trying to do that. And that's like the spirit of English common law, right? Like there's a social norm of lining up and you go in order, and if you violate that, then you are not acting justly, and you're trying to cheat people, and we're gonna punish you for for sort of violating that social norm or trying to subvert it or something like that, and saying, I didn't know or whatever. That's what judges used to do. And in fact, like under law of the merchant, English common law, that was their role. Is, okay, what's the social norm here, and what could a reasonable person expect in this particular situation? And if you're violating that in some flagrant way, then you're the one that's in the wrong, and the person that followed the social norm is in the right. And that's a very reasonable standard. And this is, to this day, what a lot of judges use is, okay, I don't have any legislation to guide me. Let's just go with the social norm. What's the normal thing that people do in a situation like this? Where we get in trouble is when those social norms are trying to be manipulated through legislation. And I think we've definitely seen that over like the last 15, 20 years, is a lot of social norms being changed for that reason. And the reason why I say that's very dangerous is because this is exactly what Marxists have been doing for a very long time. And you can look at Soviet Russia, or pretty much any Marxist government. They are the most murderous by far, for a good reason, because they're trying to remake society according to Marxist paradise or whatever, and they end up killing a lot of people as a result. You're not conforming to these standards or these new social norms that we're trying to implement, so we'll just kind of get rid of you. And that's very, very dangerous. And a society where sort of norms are constantly changing indicates sort of like a populace that just doesn't is trying to follow some very quick changing legislation or top-down mandates, and they just can't keep up. Like there's one story that I heard in the science fiction realm, which I thought was really like kind of indicative of this. And there was a lot of people there are very progressive and so on, but there was a story written called I Identify as an Attack Helicopter, or something like that. And for a lot of people that are on the left, they were like, oh, this is clearly somebody that's conservative, probably a straight white male, and making fun of transgender people. And so they came out against it and said, this is very anti-trans, blah, 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 blah. And then it turned out that the person that wrote it is actually a trans individual. And everyone's minds exploded, because they were like, what the heck do we do? What's the actual right? What do they want us to do? Like, am I supposed to support the trans person, or is this actually anti-trans or whatever? This is kind of like the situation we find ourselves in this cultural moment, where you have like sort of like weird demands by people up top that are almost self-contradictory. And this is exactly kind of like what Marxism ran into. You have to be productive, but to each according to his needs, like you have all these like weird norms and stuff like that. And that's the direction we've been going in. It's very authoritarian. It's a lot of people that don't like that just want to be safe, and they associate safety with like basically giving into the dictates of the people that are above them. But that itself is sort of contradicting each other. And you got transgender swimmers, and who do you cheer for? I don't like, if like what do you like? It's almost like you can't twist your brain enough to make that work. I don't know.
I mean, I don't disagree. And I love the analogy of time preference that you use in
Mhm.
the article as well,
Mm.
of just explaining, like, look, changing these common laws of our social practices on a repeated basis sends a signal that we do not understand what our society wants.
Mm.
I want to play devil's advocate.
Mhm.
And the two things that I kind of am curious your thoughts on are, in America in particular, this is not a one culture fits all. This is
Mhm.
truly a melting pot of so many different cultures that come together. Obviously, they get siloed off into different regions. It's why every single major metropolitan city has a Chinatown. One of my friends just over in Los Angeles sent me the little marker on Google Maps saying Torongelis as a sign to the Persian population that lives
Mhm.
over at Westwood. So we see these different cultures start to come in. And do you think that maybe that plays a factor into watching our common laws, especially over these last couple of decades, change repeatedly?
Yeah, I would say that there's a part of that, but mostly when I'm a Korean immigrant, and I immigrated when I was 8 years old. Generally, wherever you go, there's already an established culture there, and you sort of fit into that. Now, that's not to say that there's no subculture that you can make, and your example of Chinatown is very apt. There is sort of like cultural sort of preservation and stuff like that. But as far as like how you treat people, or how contracts are enforced and things like that, I don't think those differ all that much. Now, maybe in some cultures, you do it with a handshake. Other cultures, you write everything down or something like that. But it goes towards whatever you know the the cultural norm in the place already was. So if in America, anything to do with land, you're supposed to write everything down, and that's that uh, arose because there were so many property disputes around land, that they're like, okay, we're not going to enforce anything unless it's written down, because he said, she said, whatever. But almost everything else, you can do a verbal contract, and that's considered fine. So those are the sort of things that I'm talking about with the bottom up. I don't think they differ all that much on the cultural level. Where it's getting kind of crazy is that it's top down, in the sense that it's contradicting a lot of the cultural norms that existed before. So, this is probably going to be controversial, but like the whole controversy around marriage over, I don't know, I guess really since like 1970, has been very very up and down, right? Like it really started with Ronald Reagan establishing no fault divorce in California. Then pretty much everybody else had no fault divorce, and I would say that changed the social norm of marriage in a very significant way, because it became sort of like a lifelong bond that you only separate in very extreme cases, to one where it became okay, well, and if both partners agree, then everyone can just sort of walk away or whatever, or even one party wants to, then you can just walk away. And then obviously with gay marriage and things like that, it changed the tenor of what marriage was from a cultural perspective. And what you hinted at earlier, like the demographic reality of a lot of places, just like your fertility rates are below 2, oftentimes like 1.5 now, where that's a demographic death spiral. You don't recover from that. We're seeing some of the consequences of sort of trying to redefine social norms according to the mandates of the people that are in charge. Not saying uh, these things don't have rationales or something, but like there are reasons why social norms develop the way they do, and throwing them away and saying, oh, that's stupid, and there's no merit to this, without actually really deeply understanding what it is very unwise. And I think we're seeing a lot of the effects of that, especially with respect to money, because for a long time it was sound money, and it was obvious to everyone that you needed sound money. But like this top-down imposition of money as something else, that it's something that can be controlled by somebody, that's been horrible for everybody involved. And I think we would have way more productivity, way more inventions, way more like progress, especially in developing countries who have been, like I said, monetarily oppressed through the IMF and things like that. Had we not, had we kept sound money, instead we have this monetary oppression that's, kept billions of people from continuing to, make something of themselves and build their own society.
Uh, I'd love it if you could expand a little bit on just this idea of like, if we had this freedom in our money and had really pure sound money, like what does that entail, or what do you envision that having been able to unlock in society that we've essentially locked ourselves or been constrained due to the financial system? You touched a little bit on like technological development and just societal development. Do you mind sharing maybe just like a thought that you have in each of those spaces?
Well, so a lot of it is just straight up rent seeking, and we talk about cantillionaires in the Bitcoin space quite a bit. But I just recorded a podcast with Andy Schoonover, and we literally talked about this like in the last few hours. But like the entire healthcare system, for example, you have these health insurance companies who have the wrong incentives, but essentially what Obamacare did was give them a huge carve out so that they can always be the middleman in any healthcare transaction. And like the numbers he gave me were absolutely shocking. But basically, if you're putting like $1,000 towards your healthcare insurance premium for a year, essentially the insurance company will stop at $850 because the $150 is their profit, and will find reasons to not reimburse anything above that, and they'll scrutinize everything. I think the statistic he gave me is like 1 in 6 claims in the United States, using healthcare.gov. If you got insurance using healthcare.gov, 1 out of 6 of those claims will not be paid out. Like they'll dispute it or something like that. It's a way in which they're rent seekers, right? Like
this is why I don't have health insurance.
Yeah, and you should listen to that podcast, because he has a really cool way of using Bitcoin and crowdfunded health to make it so that you don't have to have insurance, but you can still get the best value as a healthcare consumer. So he was talking about like these procedures, that this heart procedure that costs like that a local hospital asked $80,000 for, and they found like a heart specialist that just does these procedures for like $25,000 or $30,000. They save $50,000 just by like moving, like switching venues or something like that. And they cut out the insurance company who's like taking a lot of the bureaucratic work, right? And so there are things like that which I think fiat money sort of enables through legislation and things like that. So Obamacare, like one of the things he pointed out was, okay, since Obamacare started, Aetna and United Health, these are the 2 biggest health insurance companies in the US. They've like their market cap's gone up like 5x, and it's because they really don't have that much competition, right? They have this carve out, and they're always going to be able to sit in between um, the the healthcare consumer, the patient, and the doctor, and they screw both the doctor and the patient. So that's just one example, but pretty much every industry you're going to find lots and lots of rent seekers, and it's essentially created through legislation, bureaucracy, fiat money. All of this is enabled uh, because they have the printing press, and centralization essentially causes all this.
I have to give a quick shout out to a brand new startup that's doing exactly this type of work that Jimmy and Alex have just described, where they've taken all of the medical data that every single hospital has, how much it costs for each different procedure all over the country, how much each specific doctor is charging per procedure. And they're essentially democratizing the data and giving everyone access to it in the hopes that you yourself are able to find the right places to go to. But they're taking it a step further and they're attacking you. If they're finding out that you're a doctor that in turn is overcharging based on the going market rate, like, now this information is public and there will be a lot of repercussions. That aside, I absolutely agree that our healthcare industry is the last semblances of a dying and broken monetary system, and it just continues to feed into that cycle. I'm curious if Jimmy, if you think that, the way the money manipulation plays an effect in how some of these industries get formed when they know, hey, the government is now involved in healthcare. Hey, there's no backstop. The government will bail anyone out. So you know what? Let's start ranking up these prices. Historically speaking, we've seen those trends. I'd love your thoughts.
Yeah, let's go back to healthcare. Who's the biggest payer? It's Medicare and Medicaid. Those are both government institutions, and they're the ones that pay out. And if you're over 65, the government pays for everything, so you have no price sensitivity to anything. And it, this is ultimately, I think, the direction that a lot of people on the left wanted to go, is Medicare for all. Everybody gets everything for free. Well, you can't really make the economics of that work unless there's a printing press on the other side. Like, a lot of these things are just not solvent, right? Like the Medicare taxes that they collect do not pay for all of the Medicare expenses that are in the system. Similar with Social Security and all these other entitlements. So, like, the backstop of money printing is really at the heart of why these rent seekers exist. So you have these giant insurance companies that are able to do this because the government's the biggest payer. Like, once in a while you'll get people like paying out of pocket or whatever. And the interesting thing is you can almost always negotiate a much better price if you're paying cash, because doctors don't want to deal with all the insurance companies and stuff. They get paid 60 to 90 days, and like some significant percentage of the time their claims are denied, and they have to deal with all the headaches of trying to collect from the patient then or whatever. If you just pay, like, doctors would much rather just deal with, okay, I've performed the surgery, here's the money, all right, great. Like that, they would prefer that too. They could get rid of a third of their back office if they can do that. But that's just one example. Every industry has this dynamic of like these rent-seeking carve-outs that are more or less legislated, right? Like there are all these regulators that force, essentially, like every corporation has an HR department. What's an HR department for? It's so that you comply on like the EEOC laws or whatever, right? It's like, okay, we have to make sure that we're not violating any particular legislation. And they're sort of like mini rent-seeking departments within every company that are not necessary for the business operation, other than complying with government mandates. And it's not a coincidence that usually, like, any new mandates come in, they're the ones that are put in charge of it. It's like, okay, well, you're good at reading the tea leaves of the bureaucrats, like continue doing that and figure out how we comply with this other mandate or this this other thing. Like, like I'm sure everyone that's had a normal job, in the lunchroom is a cork board with federal minimum wage guidelines that you have to be looking at, and it's like in fine print and it's really big, but they have to hang it there because that's part of the bureaucracy or regulation or whatever. And this is what regulation, legislation, bureaucracy, rent seeking look like. And in return for all of that, what you get are stuff like PPP loans, right? Because you're not going to get a PPP loan if you didn't comply with all of the other regulations around it, fraud withstanding or whatever. But that's sort of like the expectation is that if you do comply with all the government mandates, well, when the time comes, then they'll bail you out. They'll give you free money or help you out when you have or put up more moats so that startups can't come in and disrupt you. Instead, we'll help you out and make sure that you don't have competition, and will make you a rent seeker as a whole industry instead. I mean, airlines are pretty much that already. Lots of other industries are utilities to a large degree. I mean, this is the economy as it is. It's way more socialist than we think.
You opened the door, and I'm so happy you did because I want to talk airlines with you. Saw airlines receive some of the biggest bailout money during the 2022 or 2020 pandemic. One of my favorite things to cite, and I'm spacing on his name, but shout out to the creator and founder of JetBlue Airways, who in the midst of the pandemic was in the middle of forming and saw an opportunity to essentially form yet another low fare airline that was going to be introduced to the market to create further competitive pricing advantage, with the expectation that companies like American Airlines and United Airlines, who have mismanaged their money, have just made their big money investors richer while screwing over the little guys who actually use their flights. Meanwhile, those people they made richer haven't set foot on an American Airlines flight probably in the last decade, to say the least. And yet here we are, because of the money the government granted them, it stunted the growth of a new airline. This new airline just went by the wayside, doesn't even exist, never came to life as a result. And now you have the airlines gouging us yet again, not even 2 years later. So talk to us a little bit about this dynamic before we dive into the meat of a previous article that you had written as well.
Yeah, so airlines are an interesting industry because if you look at transatlantic flight times from like 1973 and compare them to now, it's actually gotten worse. So it takes longer for us to go across the Atlantic than it used to 50 years ago. What does that tell you? Well, this is an industry that's not innovating very much. I mean, we did have the Concorde for a while, but they flew their last flight way long ago. And a lot of the monetary shenanigans that have gone on in the airline industry, it's largely due to some sort of like prestige factor around the airline. So nearly every country has some sort of, or at least developed country has some sort of airline, right? There's Air France, British Airways, Korean Air, Japan Air. Like these were all sort of like prestige industries within each country, and they all bought from Boeing or Airbus or whatever. And they've gotten into a lot of trouble because they were government subsidized essentially. And they've, the three major airlines in the US that are left right now, which is American, United, and Delta, they've all gone bankrupt at some point in the last 20 years, right? Like, and they've had to be revived essentially through Congress and congressional interference or whatever. But yeah, I mean, these industries are very sick, and they and they don't operate very efficiently. There's some suspicion that they lose money on every flight, every seat that they sell, despite the fact that they almost always oversell tickets on every flight. Somehow they're losing money on everything. So, it's kind of crazy, and I'm sure you'll get into this, but the way that they stay in business, they totally learn from the central bank. It's issuing their own miles, and like it's crazy, but they've essentially become banks.
Jimmy, can I steal you for at least another 20 minutes, or do you have a hard out in the next 10?
I'm good for another 20 minutes. Yeah.
Perfect. I want to now dive into, and I'm trying to pull up the title of where you essentially call airline miles the original shit coin. And I sat with my girlfriend's dad, who was a pilot at UPS for his entire career, and I was asking him a lot of questions about their business versus, the commercial airline business. And what he broke down to me further strengthened your argument, which was the idea that, look, you buy one ticket, one direction from Florida to LA, it's maybe $200 to $250, depending on when you're buying the ticket. But that's just one spot. In that one spot on my UPS plane, I could probably have fit over $500 worth of shipping just for UPS on one seat. And now you expand that into the storage space, the undercarriage area, your checked bag, and all of a sudden you really see the business model for commercial airlines. Like, where is that money coming from? You touched on, and I don't want to steal your thunder, the dynamic of United's market cap versus how much they make on miles. Please break that down.
Yeah. So one of the things that we found out during the pandemic was just how much these mileage programs are worth. And, I think we've all known that they're very, very popular, and, like a lot of credit cards use them and so on. But we didn't find out what these things were worth until the pandemic. And it was because a lot of these airlines needed to get loans against something, and they're already sort of leveraged like crazy. So they could, for example, take out loans against their fleet, for example, but they chose during the pandemic to take out loans against their mileage programs. And they asked prominent investment banks to go and get a valuation for their mileage programs. And what we found was that the mileage program, United's mileage program, was worth more than the airline itself. And the same for American Airlines, the same for Delta. What's going on? How is it possible for an airline's miles program to be worth more than the airline itself? And I think I put this in the article. It's like finding out that your kitchen in your house is worth $800,000 and your home is worth $500,000. How is that possible? That means that the rest of the house has negative equity. And it turned out that that's actually fairly accurate, because the airline mile scam basically is they sell these miles to pretty much all of their partners, right? Because consumers desire them because the perception is that they'll get free flights or whatever. So for example, American Airlines has a deal with, I think it's Citibank, where the Citibank credit card, they'll give you 50,000 miles if you sign up with their credit card. Well, they need to get the 50,000 miles from American. They pay American $500 or so for those 50,000 miles. And instead of giving you $500 in cash, they give you 50,000 miles, helping you get better status on American or something like that. And that turns out to be a very lucrative business, because a lot of people want those miles. And especially since 1983, when these miles programs were established, there's been sort of like a frenzy around miles. So a lot of people will like stay loyal to a credit card, or rent from a particular rental car place just because they can get miles and so on for a particular airline. So they've been able to sell tons and tons of miles, and this is their actual business, is selling miles created out of thin air, and then using that revenue, and then that ends up being essentially debt. All the miles that exist are essentially debt, and they put restrictions around the redemption as a way to devalue those miles. So when they have a lot of seats available during like the summer or something like that, then they'll make a lot of those available for redemption, for example, and they'll discharge that way. Once in a while, they'll even devalue miles and say, okay, instead of 25,000 miles, you need 50,000 for this particular thing. Or they'll do one leg is 12 and a half, but most of the time it's actually 25 or something like that. And that's the business that they're actually in, is they actually lose money on every seat, but because they're able to get revenue through selling future flights through miles, they're actually profitable. So really, you can think of an airline as running a miles program and running a flight program as a way to discharge their debt. And that's essentially what it's come down to. And surprisingly, airlines aren't the only ones that are kind of like this. If you look at any large business, what they're doing is they financialized everything. So if you go and buy cars from a dealer, almost always you're going to finance that car, right? Or I mean, there are people that pay complete cash for it, but you're financing that car. Where's that money come from? Those financing arms are essentially banks. They create the money out of nothing. So they take advantage of the financialization. I remember GMAC Financing. That's the GM arm that just did the financing for the GM vehicles, and they grew to be. They were way more valuable than the GM, the car company, right? Like, and GM, the car company, went bankrupt. They actually sold off GMAC to another to a bank or something like that to raise money before they went bankrupt. So they tried. They got a government bailout anyway. And I mean, this is how everything works now, is where you hyper financialize everything, and at that point, everybody becomes kind of a bank, right? You're able to, instead of loaning out. I mean, you sell your product for future promises of, loan payback or something like that, and those are always created out of nothing. So it's kind of crazy, but a large part of our economy has financialized, which indicates that they're a bunch of rent seekers.
Is there, I mean, like, we can literally go through almost every single industry and find how they have financialized it and created sort of that dichotomy within industries. Is there an industry off the top of your head that you think is valid, or it is actually acceptable practice to go down that path?
To financialize, I don't know. That's a great question. I don't think there's ever an excuse to print your own money or print new money into existence, because you're diluting everybody else, and in essence you're becoming a thief at that point. But like the like ostensibly what they'll say is, okay, well, with financing that allowed more people to own cars, or with airline miles that allowed more people to travel or something like that. And I don't know if I believe that. Like the economic analysis almost always looks at only the benefits without any of the drawbacks, like who are you actually diluting and who are you hurting through this. Because if it was just like a simple win-win by pushing money around, then that's kind of like violating the laws of nature or something, right? Like conservation of energy or something like that. So I suspect that that's the no, but I don't know. I'd have to think about all of the ways in which you would do it. Now, if you have like loans that cost somebody else, have opportunity costs for somebody else. So if I were to lend you money, my money to go and buy a car, and you're paying me interest, then that would be a legitimate form of a loan. But of course, like, you're not gonna charge like 1.2% APR for that. Like, I would never take that side of the trade. But for cars, it's happening all the time, right? You get the super low APR to incentivize you to go buy your newest truck or something. That is clearly like financialized games. And there's some level of doing that everywhere. I mean, even on Amazon, you buy something expensive, and they'll be like, okay, option to pay in 4 installments or something like that. Which I mean, that might be okay, but it's okay. You can take out a loan for this much, and you'll get like a 2% APR for, like you can buy this over time, pay over time, or something like that. Almost all of them have something like that, as long as it's expensive enough. So I suspect that it's it's very, very prevalent, and probably overproduces. And as consumers, we probably overconsume as well.
Do you
What
know
do
of
you
sorry to interrupt. Do you know of a example of sort of these businesses getting their customers into bed financially with them earlier than Macy's? They were kind of the original business credit issuer that I can find, like the classic American tale of here's a Macy's card.
Well, I would go back even further to like Henry Ford, even, right? So one of the things that he did was he made it so that you can pay like $1 a week or something, like, or a dollar a week to get his cars. And this was when I think Ford Model Ts were like $400 or something like that. And you could, the critique was $1 a day, $1 a week forever, or something like that. And that I think did have some opportunity cost for Henry Ford, but he just wanted more cars out on the road. That became financialized, I think, probably quicker than some of the other stuff. It's also like mortgages, I think, that were probably before that. If you think about it, like, we're all buying. If you're putting 20% down, you're buying a house on 5x leverage. That's essentially what you're doing. That sort of thing was less common, but it still existed. And post Federal Reserve, this was all kind of fair game, where you would have this ability to do that. Now, some of it was like those were legitimate loans, and had opportunity costs for somebody, and this was why the rates were fairly high back then. But I think, especially coming out of World War II, it was way more common. But yeah, commercially, for consumer goods, I would say, store credit, or store, based stuff like Macy's. That's probably one of the first ones. I think Sears might have had something too, but I don't know. Yeah.
Well, on that topic, like a lot of those companies, like Sears, for example, used to do a layaway program,
Yeah.
and it would allow people to like just chip away at your bill. But we're also starting to see this, like, I put it in quotes, new industry of buy now, pay later, which is just like a glorified layaway program, where instead of the business selling you the product, holding the risk, it's a third party doing that. Where does this new industry fit into this equation of like manipulating the money system?
Yeah, I mean, they're taking advantage of a lot of the high time preference behavior that a lot of us have learned through fiat money, and they're using the fact that a lot of this money can be created into existence through credit. Like, even the whole use of credit cards, if you think about it, it's all money created out of thin air temporarily until you pay it off. But that, if you're holding a balance, then it's obviously more permanent. But that whole financialization of all of these industries is indicative of the sort of like artificial demand that fiat money produces, and it's often things that aren't that productive. So, you'll get a new bag or something like that, and not to say that bags aren't useful. So they certainly can be, but especially like for consumption goods, for Velben goods, I guess, like it's not necessarily something that creates new products or something like that. It's very inwardly focused. It's not really pushing the frontier anywhere. And a lot of it just doesn't get used. People like just buy it to possess it, and that's it, instead of using it as a capital good to create other capital goods or something like that, which is the tendency under a Bitcoin standard. And this is, I'm sure you guys have all seen, where somebody gets on a Bitcoin standard, the only thing that they really want to spend Bitcoin on is to make more Bitcoin. And that's a productive use of capital. It's almost like a hyper productive currency for that reason. Whereas like if you're in dollars, you just spend it on whatever, and it's like, oh, I have this desire today. It's not going to produce anything for anybody, but I'm gonna go buy this thing. Like we have this phenomenon of hoarders, right? Like that just buy stuff and just like they don't do anything with it, and they just leave it in their house. Like, does that really benefit anybody anywhere? No, it's like somebody made it, somebody shipped it, somebody sold it, and you just leave it in your attic or something. Like that ultimately doesn't build up civilization at all. It's really consumption for the sake of consumption, and that's it. Which in Keynesian terms is great. You have high velocity of money, but from an Austrian perspective, it's about as productive as a broken window.
Jimmy, I want to be respectful of your time here. It's Friday evening. I know you've got big plans cooking up. Where can our audience, who's been blown away by this conversation, where can they learn more about you, stay up to date with what you're writing, and just hear what you're thinking?
Well, I'm available at Jimmy Song on Twitter. My website is programmingbitcoin.com, and I've been publishing my articles to Bitcoin Magazine. You can search for me. It's just search Bitcoin Song Sheet. That's the name of my column. So, I've been, I have one on property rights that I want to maybe incorporate BIP 119 into, that I want to write about this week. So, that's where you can find me.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to reading that, Jimmy. And thank you so much for joining us. Guys, we're going to go to a quick commercial break, and then we'll be breaking down some short news and notes with Alex and Chris. We're back. What is up? We're coming on the end of the show, I think. Unfortunately, for all of you who have been enjoying this experience, thank you for joining us. I
I just want to remind you guys that we do have the opportunity to join our team here, not only at Bitcoin Magazine, but specifically with us on the video team. We're hiring 2 new video editors. So if you are even competent and understand Bitcoin, shoot over your resume. The applications are open on bitcoinerjobs.com. And if you're a consistent viewer of either just the live stream or you watch this later, dude, you absolutely are someone we want to be working with. So flag it for us. Shoot any of us 3 a DM. Like, we want to be working with you and we want to hire awesome Bitcoiners to join our ranks and join our team. So take a look at that job.
On that note, we will require a little bit of proof of work. So that doesn't mean you have to have worked on Bitcoin content before, but I would love to see a portfolio of a little bit of, some editing projects that you've had a hand in. Yeah, I mean, the process is pretty simple. Submit your application, shoot us a DM if you want to if you want it to stand out a little more. I'm happy to pull some applications out of the slush pool and give them a look. But yeah, links to like work that you've done on YouTube or elsewhere would be super helpful. Bitcoin knowledge and understanding and passion is an absolute must, and we won't tolerate any shitcoinery. So keep that in mind when you apply. But yeah, we're really excited to bring more people on the team. This is just the forward facing part of the video team. We have like 3 or 4, sometimes up to 5 other people that work on this stuff. So it's a pretty great squad. I think we all are living our dream jobs right now.
I would say so. I'll send it over to Q.
Yeah, I don't know how this was possible, but I will tell you one thing that was a catalyst to making this dream a reality. It was attending the Bitcoin conference back in 2021. And I highly recommend, if you did not come join us in Miami, that you need to come join us in 2023 in location not disclosed at this time. Tickets are cheaper than they will ever be. There's no discount code at this moment, but just go buy a ticket right now. The location will be somewhere in the US. We hope that you will join us. I mean, look, I know that we posted all the content. We were having a live stream from the main stage and the mining stages. So you guys were able to get as much of the content that we were putting out there. But it's more than just that, like the environment, being around all these people, meeting the talking heads that you see on your favorite podcast or on YouTube, or just the people you interact with on Twitter. It's awesome to see everyone, come to life. Shout out to the Twitch fam and, all of you guys who came up to us and were talking to us about how you watch the show. And, we want to meet you guys. And it's a great opportunity for you to meet fellow Bitcoiners from all over the world. You never know who you meet that's local to you, that maybe you get clued in on a Bitcoin meetup in your local area. So it's more than just coming to see the speakers speak. It's also just about, being at Bitcoin Disneyland. That's really what it is. It's just Disneyland for Bitcoiners. I don't know if you guys have anything more to add on that front.
No,
I think it really just gets the gears whirring in your head about how to at least get a side hustle, if not a second gig going. I mean, you're going to see the whole of the Bitcoin industry market at one of these conferences for sure. And you're going to talk to so many people that I think it just really has a way of like meaningfully improving your life by way of indirectly through income, just based on, depending on how entrepreneurial you are, the opportunities are literally endless at these events. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, and I think it was quite a spectacle. I mean, just speaking from being there, I know for myself and Alex, Q was at 2021, but this is Alex and I's first time going. I think Alex and I would have, and even Q would have loved to be attendees because it was awesome. We were working quite hard, but it's a sentiment to the industry. It's a sentiment to all the people who are there. It was awesome to have 25,000 Bitcoiners descend down on Miami. And we're trying to make 2023 even better. We've got a lot of feedback, both positive and negative, and we welcome all of it to try and make that an even better experience. I know I could say CK told us that I know we'll have more information in the summer about location and or timing and all that. But yeah, just keep an eye out for that. You can get pre-sale tickets now at b.tc/conference/2023.
Yeah, I'm interested to see like what degree of clown worldery we're in by the time that conference rolls around. But there will be a safe haven in the Bitcoin conference. I actually, Chris, I would say I would rather have worked the conference because, to be honest, at this point it's like a festival, and I'm not a very social person, so I need like a purpose, or I would have just been lost the whole time. Like,
Oh, I would have been wandering, to be honest, but the exhibit hall was so big you could wander the entire like 4 days of the conference. No, I mean, I had a blast working it, but I wish I had more time to talk to some of the people. Like I talked to BTC Sessions for all of like 5 minutes. I know you guys were on the desk with him for a better part of an hour, but even like Ansel Lindner, we have him on the show all the time. I don't think any of us met him at all.
No.
And that's the thing that's a bummer. He's like, I didn't want to bother you guys. I'm like, I would have loved to talk to Ansel for at least 5 minutes or so. So yeah, I mean, it just showed how busy we were.
I
yeah,
felt like such a tool when I saw Ansel while I was sitting on the news desk, and all I could do was like subtly give him like I was like, dude, I deal with you so much. I absolutely love talking to you, and I can't believe that that was the only way. Like, I'm Persian, so like a part of Persian culture is like it's literally the opposite of Irish goodbye. You have to say hi to everyone when you walk into a room, and you have to say goodbye to everyone. I've been called out by my elders when I don't do that before. And like a part of me was like, oh no, like when you told me, Chris, that like Andy Edstrom, who also joined us on the show, who is I'm gonna dox this, hosting a Bitcoin meetup this Saturday that I'm gonna be at. Like I didn't even realize he was at the conference. Like I didn't see him at all. But dude, it's a full-blown festival. It's just a giant party where everyone there loves Bitcoin. Simple as that.
yeah, I never expected that I would meet Andrew Yang in person and validate all of my beliefs previously about him. So that was a win.
Touche. I guess the last piece of business before we wrap this thing up and maybe throw some more sats in the chat for those who are still lingering. Um, all of our Bitcoin 22 conference swag. Is today the last day that it's going to be available? Do we know that for sure?
The tickets are gonna go.
No,
Wait,
no.
sorry. What are you saying? The conference
The
swag?
swag. Like not this. This is actually for a new show that we're doing, but
No,
like
I think,
the B22 shirts and all of that stuff.
No, I
No,
think
I
they're
think that's
selling
just-
until they're gone.
yep.
Okay. Well, there is a limited supply. Use promo code FOMO. Get any of the gear that's still available. We're slowly dwindling the supply that we do have. So be sure to check out. I mean, I'm going to keep pounding this drum. If you don't own a Money Fest windbreaker, like you're just not doing it right. And then, of course, the Moon Mag has officially shipped. It is available at Barnes and Nobles. If you just wander by Barnes and Nobles, like feel free to stop by, take a picture of it on the shelves, put it on social media, tag us, and we'll retweet it. Like we love seeing, as I like to call them, a Bitcoin magazine in the wild, an homage to the Pokemon days.
I have a shill. So this
do it.
weekend, my Genesis prints go up for auction. There's only 21 of them made. I'm holding a couple of them hostage. I've never done a lightning auction, so I'm interested to see how that goes. But we're gonna drop the link in the chat, and you can use lightning to bid on a print. I'll tell you I sold them for $1,000 a piece, but I suspect they will not be nearly as expensive because there's no what do they call it? There's no floor in this auction. So you might see this lithographic print made off a stone, made with copper, tons, 3 people involved in the process of making these. Very complicated. They're very high value, fine art. You might see it go for a couple bucks. So chip in, make a bid. It's a good way to snag some great Bitcoin art, really cheap.
I also want to address this question presented in the chat right now, just really quickly from Damon Crusher. So, Carrot, what exactly is this? I mean, your guess is as good as mine, but in actuality, it is an app that offers you the opportunity to read countless articles about Bitcoin. One of the primary sources is Bitcoin Magazine, but you can also earn sats by reading these articles through the app. So if you're a frequent reader of Bitcoin Magazine, I highly recommend you get the app. And I don't know the exact number, so don't quote me on this. But as you read articles, it will trigger and essentially give you free sats, as well as these sats giveaways that we do here on this show, as well as throughout social media as well. I know that the Carrot team is developing a lot of new offerings. I mean, the app has been vastly upgraded in just the limited time that I've been a user. And, I know that they're cooking up a lot of cool stuff as well of how users are going to be able to interact with Bitcoin related content, as well as the wallet that's incorporated with Carrot. So I highly recommend, if you're not a user, but you read our articles, that you go ahead and download that app just so you can earn free sats for doing what you're already doing. Why wouldn't you? But I hope that, I don't know if either of you have any additional things about Carrot that you wanted to chime in.
Carrot rocks. Download Carrot. Read all your Bitcoin magazine articles through Carrot and earn Bitcoin for doing your due diligence. It's great.
Yeah, we survived longer than CNN Plus. Just had to have a subtle dig there. The Earn Carrot app lasted longer than CNN Plus, and we did it at a fraction of the cost. I can only imagine if we had $300 million, it would have been put into Bitcoin or better allocate those funds than whatever they created.
The only app worse than like CNN Plus that I've used, besides like
You use CNN Plus?
ESPN Plus.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, ESPN Plus is fucking terrible.
I have
And
that.
the UFC should have never made that. Yeah, I used it. It's awful. Carrot's way better.
I refuse
They
to
don't
pay
do.
for. Yeah.
But like, what
What's
would
that?
have?
I'll finish my thought real quick and then I'll send it back. I refuse to use ESPN Plus, and slowly, like over the last 5 to 6 years, I mean, Q and Alex can say they keep putting more and more stuff behind the paywall. And then I'm like, I just don't even use them anymore. And I'm way happier. It's like they're killing their business. Perfect example. And I'm going to tie this back in. So Pat McAfee, his team had a YouTube show for the draft last night. He mentioned he shout out the Bitcoin conference because Aaron Rodgers came on and he was a speaker. Recommend you guys go and check out his speech with OBJ, Serena Williams, and him talking about Cash App and Bitcoin adoption. And it's very interesting that like Pat McAfee and his show, more sports based, but they're crushing ESPN and the NFL network. And they're kind of like us. They're like a smaller group of guys doing a show.
I thought Pat McAfee got killed by the Clintons.
No, that's that is what is that?
Ron McAfee.
Yeah, Ron McAfee of McAfee, like the antivirus. Pat McAfee used to be a punter for the Colts. He's a very funny dude.
Okay.
Alex,
Punter
you would
or
love
kicker?
him. He was a punter.
Okay. Alex, I'm genuinely curious, and I do want to have this conversation live on air so that I can point to this and forever dox you in this space. But,
Oh no.
what would have been the alternative for the UFC to try grow their audience base than to go to the largest sports audience in the world? Like, I don't disagree. I think ESPN and ESPN Plus has been on a steady decline, probably correlated with the time that they've been owned by Mothership Disney. But like, what is the alternative in that scenario?
I haven't been
You're Dana
following
White.
I haven't been following the politics of Dana White for a couple months now, or any of like the UFC's many scandals. But if I was the UFC, I would have wanted to create something special. I just feel like they kind of sold out with ESPN Plus. It was probably lucratively like the best thing to do, but my beef is actually just with the shitty phone app, because I also never want to watch fights on a phone. I want to watch them on a big hoary fucking TV screen, right? Or in
Yeah.
person. Like I don't want to watch. I'm in the David Lynch camp of like, cinema was never meant to be this. Like
You mean Q can talk to this? Quibi was not a success for that reason. They like kept
Yeah.
forcing people to be like TV on your phone. Go ahead.
On the
Quibi
flip
failed for
side,
two-
though,
Quibi failed for two reasons, and I will fully stand by this. They failed. I will give Katzenberg like a little bit of leeway on like, we stopped traveling and a lot of consumption. Like, there's data out of Netflix, for example, that shows more than 50% of users under a certain age were watching more content on their phone than on their laptops or TVs. Like, that is actually a valid case study. But they forgot the key indicator of that data sample, which was under a certain age. And I literally had a client who was doing the rewrites on the Snapchat biopic. So it was essentially supposed to be like the same movie as The Social Network, but for Snapchat. And the script was fucking hilarious. It was catered to the audience that actually uses Snapchat, which is also the same audience that watches content on their phone. And they completely wrecked it and then tried to turn it into like cater it to like people who are over the age of 35 who like barely know how to use anything on their phone, let alone didn't realize Netflix offers a phone app. And so that was the disconnect. And I think if they had really hammered home content for a younger demographic, you would actually see Quibi competing with TikTok right now. And I had this conversation at length with a few of their execs who, in not so nice ways, told me that I have no idea what I'm talking about. To which I responded, "No, you have no idea what you're talking about."
All right.
So, yeah.
This is Q's PTSD from the Hollywood machine
It
coming
comes
out.
out from time to time. I mean, look,
I
there
just
was a
want to I want to
moment-
hug Q and be like, you're in the Bitcoin space, buddy. It's all good
Yeah.
now.
I genuinely had the thought this morning, and even like I only read Jimmy's piece this morning, I will admit that. But then also, even while we were having this conversation of like, dude, I want to report my old agency to the EEOC. Because let me tell you, they're just a bunch of fucking white people who pound the we love diversity and inclusion. Meanwhile, they tell me the only brown guy in the department, you didn't gel well with the department because I
You know
call
how
them
I
rape.
you know how I get back at Trader Joe's? I spent
How?
like 3 years working at a Trader
Oh,
Joe's.
no,
Simply
don't.
this.
I like this. I like that you do this. I don't want this to be ruined for you.
What? Well, I don't do it anymore. But if you so choose, there's a fat 20% discount on all goods at Trader Joe's if you just tell them you work there. There's no system on the back end to check. You tell them you work there, and then you tell them a number between like 1 and like 200, and they'll be like, "Oh, nice."
What? I'm so confused.
Wait,
Do I
that's
just
it?
walk in?
You tell them you work there, and if they happen to ask for a store number, you just tell them a number.
57.
Like, I-
That's our store. That's literally
Yeah,
our
I just
store.
go like 127, or you just say a city where there is a Trader Joe's, and then you talk about the city, and then you get 20% off. It's great. But if you spend $10,000 on groceries every year, 8,000. No, don't steal from Trader Joe's. I actually, like, oddly enough, I used to be really like angry that I was never paid well at Trader Joe's, but it's a business and I voluntarily work there. What can you do? But actually, I started doing this show, and one of my former like bosses, like a store owner, manager, the guy, the captain, actually reached out to me from like a NIM Twitter account and was like, "Dude, this is awesome. I never got to talk to you about Bitcoin when you worked here, but this is so cool that you're in it." Like, so I was like, "Oh, hell yeah, this is great. It's spreading."
That's awesome.
Nice. All right. I think it's about that time. Plus, I only have 30 minutes to make lunch before we have a staff meeting. So, any last words before we sign off?
I'm all good on my end.
Get your copy of the Moon Mag. It's a great magazine. You get 10% off with promo code FOMO. 10% off everything in the store. Promo code FOMO. Maybe we can work on that discount. Maybe we can do a limited 21% at some time. But right now it's 10, so that's pretty good. Cool.
Stay humble and stack sats all. Good night.
Peace.